Welcome back. What you're about to hear aren't just stories, they're memories, echoing through the fog of war. Before we begin, like the video, subscribe and tell me where are you from and what time are you watching. Now, get comfortable. The rain is already falling, and the stories are on their way. Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Volkov, 24 years old, 2nd Battalion, 104th Guards Air Assault Regiment, 76th Guards Air Assault Division, born in Pskov, Russia. The concrete dust falls like snow, coating my blood-crusted knuckles in gray powder. Somewhere nearby, a BTR engine growls before stalling again in the -20-degree cold. The radio at my feet crackles with desperate voices, another company pinned down 3 blocks east. Artillery thunders in the distance, the rhythmic percussion of our guns pounding the southeastern districts. But here, in this shattered 5-story apartment block, there is only the sound of labored breathing from the 7 remaining men of my platoon, and the occasional snap of a sniper round passing through the empty window frames. "Dushman at your 2 o'clock, Lieutenant," whispers Sergeant Baranov, his voice unnaturally calm. 2nd floor of the yellow building, window with the hanging blanket. I shift my position, careful not to disturb the loose debris that might give away our location. Through my scope, I catch a fleeting glimpse of movement, a shadow passing behind dirty fabric. I center my crosshairs on the window, controlling my breathing as I was taught at the academy. The figure appears again, bearded, wearing a wool pakol cap, shouldering what looks like an old SVD Dragunov. My finger tightens on the trigger of my VSS Ventores. The suppressed special operations rifle makes a muted cough as I fire. Through the scope, I watch the figure jerk backward, dropping from view. "Contact down," I murmur, already scanning for new threats. "Baranov, check our rear approach. Kuznetsov, how's Morozov?" "Still breathing, sir," comes the reply from the corner where our medic hunches over the wounded private. "But we need to get him out within the hour, or he won't make it." I look down at the crude map spread across my knees. Our planned extraction. Point still 4 blocks away through territory swarming with Chechen fighters. The same fighters who had ambushed us 18 hours earlier, cutting our 30-man platoon down to just 8. 8 freezing, exhausted paratroopers trapped in a city that devours Russians. "We move in 5 minutes," I announce, feeling the weight of command pressing down harder than my body armor. "Save your strength. This will be a long day." Our descent into hell had begun 3 weeks earlier, when our battalion received deployment orders to Chechnya. The Second Chechen War was 4 months old by then, but the battle for Grozny, the meat grinder, as veterans of the First War called it, had just begun. I remember the briefing at our base in Pskov, standing among fellow officers as our battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sokolov, outlined our mission. "Gentlemen, you will be part of the eastern offensive into Grozny," he declared, pointing to the map on the wall. "Our intelligence indicates weakened resistance in these sectors. Your task is to secure these key intersections and administrative buildings as part of the encirclement operation." A veteran captain had snorted quietly beside me. "Intelligence said the same thing in '94, he muttered. 20,000 dead Russians later." I had ignored his pessimism then. Fresh from the academy, decorated for action in Dagestan, I believed in our superior training, our equipment, our cause. I had studied the mistakes of the First Chechen War extensively, how unprepared conscripts had been slaughtered in the streets by highly motivated fighters. But we were different. We were VDV, elite airborne troops, the Blue Berets, pride of the Russian military. My platoon had deployed with high morale, singing the old Afghanistan songs on the transport planes and trading jokes about hunting, bandits. Even the grizzled contract soldiers, the kontraktniki who formed our experienced backbone, seemed confident. Reality began to erode that confidence during our first week in the staging area outside Grozny. Artillery pounded the city day and night, but each reconnaissance report told the same story. The Chechens were dug in deep, converting apartments into fortresses, sewers into transit routes, and every intersection into a killing zone. "They're not running this time," observed Sergeant Baranov, my most experienced squad leader. as we watched attack helicopters circling the smoking city. They've had 5 years to prepare. He was right. The Chechens had learned from the first war just as we had. But they had the advantage of defending their home territory. They knew every alley, every cellar, every sniper position. And they had prepared a welcome for us. We entered the city on January 17, 2000, moving on foot behind our BTR-80 armored personnel carriers. Our sector was the eastern district of Micro-Rayon, a Soviet-era residential area with identical concrete, apartment blocks arranged in neat rows. Or, at least they had been neat before artillery and airstrikes transformed them into skeletal hulks. The first 2 days passed in a tense but manageable rhythm, methodically clearing buildings, establishing strong points, maintaining communication with adjacent units. Occasional sniper fire and hit-and-run attacks tested our alertness, but nothing we couldn't handle. On the third day, everything changed. Movement at 11 o'clock, 400 meters, reported Private Kuznetsov, our marksman, as we prepared to cross an open square. 3 figures moving between the buildings. I raised my binoculars, scanning the area he indicated. Nothing but snow-covered rubble and the black squares of empty windows. "Are you certain?" I asked. "Positive, Lieutenant," he insisted. They were wearing white winter camouflage. I hesitated, then made a decision. "We'll divert through the building complex to the south, avoid the square altogether." The decision saved most of us. As we turned away from the square, the first mortar rounds began falling exactly where we would have been. Then came the distinctive rattle of multiple PKM machine guns opening fire from concealed positions. "Contact front," shouted Sergeant Petrov as bullets chewed through the wall beside us. "Heavy weapons, multiple positions. Fall back to the green building," I ordered, pointing to a 3-story structure we had cleared earlier. Fire teams leapfrog, maintained suppression. We executed a fighting withdrawal, each squad covering the others as we retreated. The BTR commander understood without instructions, reversing his vehicle while laying down covering fire with the 14.5mm KPVT heavy machine gun. For 15 minutes, we held our position in the green building, exchanging fire with an enemy we rarely glimpsed. Then our luck ran out. The RPG hit our BTR with a thunderous crash, the shape charge punching through armor and igniting the fuel. The resulting explosion killed the crew instantly and showered our position with burning debris. "We need to move before they outflank us," Sergeant Baranov urged. "This position is compromised." He was right, but our options were limited. The Chechens had demonstrated perfect knowledge of the terrain and had likely prepared multiple ambush points along any retreat route. Our company command post was 20 blocks west, through territory now clearly controlled by the enemy. "We'll move north," I decided, pointing to the apartment complex we now found ourselves in 18 hours later. "Establish a defensive position and call for extraction." What followed was a harrowing fighting retreat through narrow streets and bombed-out buildings. We lost contact with the rest of our company and battalion. The radio yielded only static, our signal blocked by concrete and electronic warfare. 4 men died during the initial withdrawal, 2 to snipers, 1 to a booby trap, and 1 to blood loss after a gunshot wound to the femoral artery. By nightfall, we had reached our current position, the upper floor of a partially collapsed apartment building with decent fields of fire and multiple escape routes. But we also had wounded, dwindling ammunition, and no clear extraction plan. The temperature dropped to minus 25 degrees Celsius with the darkness. We could not risk a fire, instead huddling together for warmth, taking turns on watch. The sounds of battle continued throughout the night. Artillery, helicopter gunships, sporadic small arms fire. Grozny never slept, and neither did we. Morning brought new problems. Private Morozov, wounded by shrapnel the previous day, had developed a raging fever. His wound, a jagged tear along his side, had become infected despite our medics' best efforts. Without proper medical attention, sepsis would kill him within hours. "We need to move," I announced after assessing our situation. "Northwest toward the stadium. Battalion should have elements there according to the operation plan." The men nodded tiredly. No complaints, no questions. Just the resigned acceptance of men who had already crossed the threshold from hope to mere survival. We moved out carefully, 2 men carrying Morozov on an improvised stretcher made from a door. The streets were eerily quiet in the morning light. No civilians, no dogs, not even birds. Just snow, ruins, and the occasional burned-out vehicle. We had covered 2 blocks when Kuznetsov froze, raising his fist in the combat signal for halt. Technical. Approaching from the east, he whispered, pointing toward the intersection ahead. I signaled everyone into defensive positions as the sound of an engine grew louder. Through my binoculars, I spotted the vehicle. A civilian, truck mounted with a heavy machine gun, carrying at least 6 fighters. Let them pass, I ordered quietly. We're outnumbered. But fate had other plans. The technical slowed as it approached the intersection, then stopped directly in our line of sight. The Chechens were consulting a map, gesturing toward E. The buildings around us, they're looking for us, Sergeant Baranov concluded. Someone's been tracking our movement. I weighed our options. All bad. If we engaged, the gunfire would attract more enemy fighters. If we remained hidden but were discovered, we'd be in an even worse position. If we tried to withdraw, we'd expose ourselves in open terrain. The decision was made for us when one of the Chechens pointed directly at our building. They had spotted something, tracks in the snow, movement at a window, some sign of our presence. Weapons free, I commanded, settling my sights on the gunner manning the truck's DSHK heavy machine gun. Prioritize the technical's gunner and driver. Our first volley was devastatingly effective. 5 Chechens down before they could properly react. But the 6th managed to dive behind the vehicle, returning fire with an AKM. Push forward, secure the technical, I ordered, seeing an opportunity to gain both transportation and weapons. First squad, covering fire. We executed the assault, textbook style, disciplined bursts of fire keeping the remaining fighter pinned, while Baranov's squad flanked the position. Within minutes, the technical was ours, along with weapons, ammunition, and a functional radio. But our victory was short-lived. The gunfire had done exactly what I feared, drawn attention. From multiple directions came the sounds of approaching vehicles and shouting men. Mount up, I ordered, already helping load Morozov into the captured truck. Kuznetsov, you know how to drive this thing? Ukrainian stepfather had a truck almost like this, he replied with a grim smile. Just needed a hammer to start it. We abandoned our carefully planned route, instead racing westward with our improbable trophy. The technical speed and mobility allowed us to break contact with pursuing fighters, navigating through narrow alleys and debris-choked streets where larger military vehicles couldn't follow. The radio crackled to life as we entered territory controlled by federal forces. Unidentified vehicle approaching checkpoint Alpha 7. Identify immediately or we will engage. I grabbed the handset, heart pounding. Checkpoint Alpha 7. This is Senior Lieutenant Volkov, 2nd Battalion, 104 Regiment. Approaching with 7 men, 1 urgent casualty. We are in a captured technical. I repeat, friendly forces in a captured vehicle. The tense minutes that followed nearly ended in tragedy. Russian soldiers with weapons raised, our technical rolling slowly forward, the mutual fear of deception. Only the blue berets we wore, the distinctive mark of VDV troops, convinced the checkpoint commander to hold fire long enough for verification. When we finally stopped behind Russian lines, I felt nothing. Not relief, not joy, not even proper exhaustion. Just a hollow emptiness as medical personnel rushed to attend to Morozov, as debriefing officers peppered us with questions, as soldiers stared at the blood-spattered technical we had arrived in. Hours later, I sat alone in a field medical station tent, finally writing the letters to the families of those we had lost. Outside, artillery continued to pound Grozny, the same broken rhythm that had formed the soundtrack to our ordeal. Sergeant Baranov found me there, offering a cigarette and flask of something that burned all the way down. You got them out. Lieutenant, he said without emotion. Most of them anyway. I didn't respond immediately, thinking of the men we'd left behind, the ones whose bodies we couldn't recover, who would remain part of Grozny's grim collection. We shouldn't have been in that position, I finally replied. Command said the sector was secure. Baranov shrugged, his weather-beaten face impassive. It's always like this. The First War, Afghanistan before that. Commanders see maps, not terrain. They see units, not men. He was right, of course. The vast distance between plans created in command posts and the brutal reality of urban combat could not be bridged by technology or tactics. Grozny didn't care about our superior training or equipment. It consumed Russians with democratic equality, conscripts and VDV alike. 3 days later, I rejoined what remained of my platoon, reinforced with replacements who looked too young and too scared. We prepared to return to the city, to the meat grinder, to continue the methodical destruction of Grozny and its defenders. The replacements asked no questions about what awaited them. Perhaps they already knew from our haunted expressions and thousand-yard stares. Perhaps they understood that some knowledge can only be acquired through suffering. As we mounted the BTRs that would carry us back into hell, I caught Sergeant Baranov watching me. His expression asked the question we all carried. Was any of this worth the cost? I had no answer then. Only the cold certainty that Grozny would extract its price from us regardless of our doubts. The city was waiting, patient and hungry, as it had waited for Russian soldiers across 2 wars. And we would feed it, one body at a time, until nothing remained but concrete dust, falling like snow onto blood-crusted knuckles. Captain Alexei Petrov, 31 years old, 3rd Directorate, Alpha Group, FSB Special Purpose Center, born in Khabarovsk, Russia. The night vision turns everything a sickly green. Emerald blood pooling beneath the body at my feet. Phosphorescent steam rising from the cavity where the man's throat used to be. The village house is silent now, except for the soft clicking of my operators clearing adjacent rooms. Methodical, professional, lethal. We move like shadows through the darkness, leaving only corpses to mark our passage. Target secure, whispers Sokolov through our comms. 3 tangos down in the west wing. East wing clear, responds Baranov. No sign of the HVT. I press my throat mic. Basement access located. Preparing to descend with Team Lead 2. Maintain perimeter and watch for runners. Our intelligence had pinpointed this compound as the hiding place of Shamil Basayev's deputy, a key Chechen commander responsible for organizing attacks across the Republic. The mission parameters were explicit. Capture preferred, but elimination. Authorized. No witnesses, no evidence, no prisoners except the primary target. I nod to Grishin, my second in command, as we position ourselves on either side of the basement door. The steel-reinforced entry looks out of place in the simple stone house, a clear indication of something valuable hidden below. Something worth protecting. Breaching, I whisper, as Grishin places the shaped charge. The specialized explosive barely makes a sound, just a sharp crack and a burst of light as the lock mechanism disintegrates. We flow through the opening like black water, silenced weapons scanning for threats. The first guard dies before he can raise his rifle, 2 subsonic rounds from my suppressed VSS punching through his chest. The second has just enough time to recognize his death in my expressionless gaze before Grishin's knife opens his carotid artery with surgical precision. At the far end of the basement, a steel door stands closed. Behind it, our target, and perhaps answers to questions that have cost too many Russian lives. I move forward, stepping over bodies still leaking life onto the cold concrete floor, readying myself for whatever waits on the other side. This is Alpha Group, Russia's premier counterterrorism unit. Silent professionals who specialize in violence at its most intimate and terrible. Tonight, we bring that violence to the heart of the Chechen resistance. Another battle in a shadow war where victory is measured in blood. And there are no witnesses to the worst of what men do to each other in the dark. 4 days earlier, I had been sitting in a secure briefing room at our forward operating base outside Konkala. Around the table sat the 8 operators who comprised my assault team. Hardened men with faces carved from stone and eyes that revealed nothing. We were Alpha Group's tip of the spear in Chechnya, conducting the most sensitive and brutal operations in a war already defined by its savagery. Colonel Komarov, our direct commander, entered the room carrying a thin file folder. The conversation died immediately as he spread photos across the table. "Gentlemen, this was discovered yesterday in Shali district," he said without preamble. The images showed the aftermath of an ambush. Russian soldiers arranged in a circle, mutilated beyond recognition, their severed heads placed in the center. "Motor rifle patrol," Komarov continued. 20 men from the 15th Regiment, missing for 3 days before a drone pass caught this. "FSB intelligence indicates this is the work of Abu Yaqub's group." A murmur passed through the team. Abu Yaqub, the nom de guerre of Ruslan Kadyrov, a former Soviet army officer turned jihadist commander, known for excessive brutality and sophisticated tactical knowledge, one of Basayev's most effective field commanders. "We've located his compound," Komarov said, replacing the grisly photos with satellite imagery and blueprints. "A village house in Chechen yurt, modified for defense. Intelligence suggests he's there planning the next phase of attacks against federal forces." I studied the material, already calculating entry points, fields of fire, and potential civilian presence. "Rules of engagement, Colonel?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Komarov's face remained expressionless. "This is a black operation, full deniability. The official record will show a precision airstrike based on intelligence. But we need confirmation of elimination and any intelligence materials secured before that strike occurs." He paused, letting the implications settle. "No witnesses, no evidence of ground forces' presence. Complete sanitation." "Understood," I replied. "The cold mathematics of counterinsurgency. A village would lose some of its inhabitants, most guilty only of proximity to our target. But the calculus of this war had long ago reduced human lives to entries in a ledger, a certain number of deaths acceptable to prevent a greater number." The next 3 days were consumed with preparation, studying the compound layout, rehearsing breach techniques, memorizing every detail of our target's habits and security measures. Our equipment was meticulously checked. Everything black or subdued, no insignia, nothing that could identify us as Russian special forces if things went wrong. The weapons were selected for their specific applications. VSS Vintorez suppressed, rifles for silent elimination at medium range, SR-1 Gurza pistols with specialized armor-piercing ammunition for close encounters, and an assortment of blades for the inevitable moment when silence mattered more than efficiency. We infiltrated, on foot during the moonless night of January 23rd. 2 Mi-8 helicopters dropped us 15 kilometers from the target, the sound of their rotors disguised by a deliberate artillery barrage elsewhere in the sector. From there, we moved through mountain forests crusted with snow and ice, avoiding villages and known Chechen observation posts. The approach took 7 hours. 7 hours of physical strain and constant vigilance. 7 hours to contemplate the violence we would soon unleash. None of us spoke beyond necessary communications. Words had become superfluous among men who had served together through the worst of the conflict. By 0200 hours, we had reached the outskirts of Chechen yurt. The village slept beneath a thin blanket of snow, smoke curling from chimneys, windows dark except for the occasional flicker of lamplight. Our target house sat at the northeastern edge, a larger than average structure with a walled courtyard and subtle security measures visible only to trained eyes. The roving sentry, the reinforced doors, the absence of livestock that might make noise at a stranger's approach. 4 sentries identified, reported Sokolov through our tactical net. Standard rotation, 5-minute intervals. Power source, confirmed at the rear, added Baranov. Generator with battery backup. I absorbed the information, making final adjustments to our assault plan. Execute on my mark. Priority is silent elimination of all security elements before primary breach. Team 1 takes the main house. Team 2 secures outbuildings and handles any runners. At precisely 0230, we began the operation with the simultaneous elimination of all 4 sentries. Suppressed shots from concealed positions dropped 2, while Grishyn and Volkov approached the others from behind with garrots, the wire loops tightening around throats before the guards could register the danger. The courtyard secured, we advanced toward the main house. Our thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures inside, some clustered in what appeared to be a common room, others isolated in smaller spaces. The layout matched our intelligence perfectly. The breach was textbook, synchronized entry, through 3 points, immediate violence directed at armed resistance. The first room contained 4 fighters sleeping on floor mats, their weapons within reach but not fast enough. We killed them in their dreams, silenced rounds and blade, strokes ensuring none lived long enough to cry out. Room by room we cleared the ground floor, each space a potential death trap, each shadow potentially concealing a defender. We found 7 more fighters, eliminating them with mechanical efficiency. Blood sprayed across whitewashed walls in arterial patterns. The metallic smell, mixing with the more domestic odors of cooking oil and wood smoke. It was in the main living area that we encountered the first organized resistance. 3 fighters awakened by some sixth sense that warns of approaching death. They managed to fire a handful of rounds, the sound suppressed by the heavy stone walls, before we cut them down. One of their bullets grazed Volkov's arm, drawing. "The first Russian blood of the operation, but status?" I demanded over comms. 12 tangos eliminated, reported Grishyn. Ground floor clear. Outbuilding secure, added Baranov. 2 additional fighters neutralized while attempting to flee. That accounted for all security elements reported by intelligence, yet still no sign of Abu Yaqub himself. That's when we discovered the reinforced door leading to the basement, the door Grishyn and I now prepared to breach. The basement door gives way under the shaped charge's precision violence. We enter the final space in a practiced flow of movement. Each step, each weapon position, each sector of responsibility drilled into muscle memory through countless rehearsals. The room beyond is surprisingly well appointed, a command center, with radio equipment, maps covering the walls, and a sleeping area with a proper bed rather than the floor mats used by subordinates. And there, rising from behind a desk with a Makarov pistol already drawn, is our target, Ruslan Kadyrov, known to the world as Abu Yaqub. He manages to fire once, the bullet whining past my ear before my VSS speaks twice. The first round shatters his right shoulder, spinning him half around. The second punches through his knee, collapsing him to the floor. Not killed, deliberately wounded for interrogation. Target secured. I report coldly, approaching. The fallen commander. Alive but neutralized. Kadyrov glares up at me with undisguised hatred, his breath coming in pained gasps. "You're too late, Russian," he spits in accented but clear Russian. "The operation has already begun." "What operation?" demands Grishyn, pressing his boot against the wounded knee, extracting a scream. I scan the maps on the wall, noting marked positions around Gudermes and Argon, planned ambush sites perhaps, or bomb emplacement locations. But something else catches my eye. A calendar with today's date circled in red. "Search everything," I order, a sense of urgency suddenly overwhelming the calm professional detachment. There's something happening today. We tear through papers, electronic devices, personal belongings. Grishyn continues the rough interrogation of Kadyrov, who alternates between pained screams and mocking laughter. "You will never stop what's coming," he taunts through bloodied teeth. Today, Russia receives our message. In a desk drawer, I discover a satellite phone and a notebook, filled with coordinates and timing sequences. Cold realization washes over me as I recognize the pattern. "Call Komarov," I tell Baranov. Immediate priority message. Multiple VBIED attacks planned across Grozny and Gudermes. Likely government buildings and checkpoints. Vehicle-borne. Improvised explosive devices, the preferred terror weapon against hardened targets. If the plans I'm seeing are accurate, at least a dozen are set to detonate during morning shift changes at military installations. Kadyrov's laughter grows, stronger despite his wounds. "You can't stop them all," he wheezes. The drivers are already in position, true believers ready for paradise. I communicate the intelligence to headquarters while the team gathers all documents and electronic media. Every second counts. Now, other units will be scrambled to checkpoints and potential targets. Bomb disposal teams activated, roadblocks established. But we all know some attacks will succeed. More Russian blood will soak into Chechen soil before this day ends. What about him? Grisham asks, nodding toward our prisoner. The mission parameters were clear. Capture for intelligence when possible. But exfiltration with a prisoner significantly increases risk, and we've secured the actionable intelligence already. I look into Kadyrov's eyes, seeing nothing but fanatical certainty. No information he could provide would be worth the danger his presence would create during our extraction. Complete the mission parameters, I say flatly. Prepare for sanitization and withdrawal. Grisham nods once, drawing his combat knife, as I turn away. There are aspects of this war I choose not to witness directly, though my orders make them inevitable. We prepare the house for the fiction that will become official history. That an airstrike eliminated this target based on intelligence. Thermite charges placed at strategic points will create the appropriate damage pattern while consuming all evidence of our presence. The bodies will tell no tales of precise gunshot wounds or knife strokes once the inferno has done its work. As we move to our extraction point under the cover of darkness, the first explosions rock distant Grozny. Some of the VB-Eds have found their marks despite our warning. The knowledge sits like lead in my stomach. We succeeded in our mission, but failed to prevent the wider bloodshed. 4 kilometers from the village, we stop at a predetermined observation point. Behind us, thermite blooms into white-hot brilliance as our charges ignite. The target house becomes a funeral pyre for its occupants, the evidence of our work disappearing in cleansing fire. Baranov casualties? I ask over comms. Reports. Coming in, he responds grimly after checking communications with headquarters. 3 VB-Ides intercepted and neutralized. 2 detonated at checkpoints. 1 at the temporary administrative building. Casualty numbers still uncertain. The weight of command settles more heavily on my shoulders. We eliminated a key Chechen commander and disrupted what could have been a coordinated attack across multiple locations. By the cold mathematics of our profession, the operation was a success. But success in this war is measured in relative degrees of bloodshed, how many lives saved versus how many taken. Exfil route confirmed clear, reports Sokolov. Helicopter, inbound to secondary pickup location. We continue our movement through the frozen forest, each man alone with his thoughts, despite our physical proximity. The night vision bathes everything in that same sickly green illumination. The snow, the trees, our blood-spattered uniforms. In this monochromatic world, there are no moral distinctions, no clear lines between necessary violence and cruelty, only varying shades of the same emerald darkness. By dawn, we have reached the extraction point, a small clearing 30 kilometers from our target. The Mi-8 arrives precisely on schedule, dropping quickly to minimize exposure. We board without ceremony, each operator maintaining security until the last man is aboard and the helicopter leaps skyward. Only then, as we rise above the Chechen mountains, does the tension fractionally release, the no words are exchanged. Each man performs his post-operation rituals, checking equipment, treating minor injuries, staring at nothing, or closing eyes against memories too fresh to process. I write my initial report with mechanical precision. Target eliminated, intelligence secured, mission parameters achieved. The sanitized version that will become the official account, with no mention of garroted sentries or wounded men executed for operational security. The blood-soaked details will remain only in the minds of those who performed them. At our forward, Base Colonel Komarov meets the helicopter personally. His face reveals nothing as he scans our expressions, counting heads to confirm all returned. Casualties? He asks simply. None of ours, I reply, handing him the intelligence materials. We recovered. Target neutralized, site sanitized. He nods once, accepting both the physical evidence and the unspoken weight behind my clinical description. The intelligence you transmitted prevented at least 3 major attacks. The others resulted in 17 federal casualties and 29 wounded, 17 dead who might otherwise have numbered in the hundreds. The cold mathematics again. The calculation that allows men like us to sleep despite the blood on our hands. Get your men fed and debriefed, Komarov orders. Detailed. Reports within 3 hours. Command will want everything while it's fresh. He walks away, already reviewing the captured documents, leaving us to our own devices. We move through the post-operation procedures like automatons, equipment turned in, weapons cleaned, bodies finally surrendering to the exhaustion held at bay by adrenaline and necessity. In the shower, I watch reddish water swirl around the drain, blood from wounds not my own, washing away like the evidence of our night's work. But some stains go deeper than skin. Some marks cannot be cleaned away with soap and water. Later, alone in my quarters completing my detailed report, I allow myself a single moment of unprofessional reflection. The faces of the men we killed flicker through my mind, most unnamed, unimportant except as obstacles between us and our target. But also Kadyrov himself, his mocking laughter silenced by Grishin's blade. The coordination and planning evident in his operation. The military training he once received from the same army now hunting him through the mountains and villages of his homeland. The ironies of this war are too numerous to catalog. Former Soviet officers fighting against the remnants of the Soviet military machine. Muslim soldiers and Russian units killing Muslim fighters in Chechen cells. Brothers killing brothers in a conflict where familial ties cross battle lines. All awash in blood that looks the same regardless of who spills it. I close the report with the standard phrasing, mission accomplished according to parameters. A phrase that covers everything and nothing. That makes no distinction between justice and vengeance, necessity and excess, duty and atrocity. Tomorrow we will receive new intelligence, new targets, new parameters. The cycle continuing until either the resistance is crushed or political calculations in Moscow determine the cost has grown too high. Either way, men like me will continue, moving through the night, dealing death with professional detachment, leaving fire and silence in our wake. This is Alpha Group in Chechnya, the Midnight Hunters, the ghosts that transform flesh and blood into statistics and reports. The instrument of a state's will applied with cold precision against those declared its enemies. And if there is a reckoning for what we do in these mountains and villages, it awaits in a future beyond the next mission, the next target, the next night of emerald darkness viewed through lenses that turn blood a sickly green. Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, 28 years old. 2nd Spetsnaz Brigade, Main Intelligence Directorate, GRU. Born in Ryazan, Russia. A man's head explodes like a dropped watermelon when hit with a 12.7mm round. This isn't metaphor or exaggeration. It's simple physics. Mass times acceleration and all that crap they tried to teach me at the academy before realizing I was better at making objects in motion stay in motion through other people's skulls. The Chechen commander I've been watching for 3 days has no idea his head is about to demonstrate these principles for the education and entertainment of my spotter. Wind shifted, murmurs Sergeant Baranov beside me, his voice barely audible. Over the light mountain breeze, 2 clicks right. I make the adjustment on my KSVK anti-materiel rifle, a beautiful monstrosity designed to penetrate light armor, but repurposed by snipers like me for turning human targets into modern art. The crosshairs settle again on the commander, who's enjoying a cigarette while instructing his men 470 meters below our hide site. Poor bastard doesn't know he's 20 seconds away from becoming the subject of an avant-garde painting titled Gray Matter on Canvas. "Send it whenever you're ready," Baranov whispers, peering through his spotting scope. I control my breathing, feeling my heartbeat slow as the familiar calm settles over me. The scope's reticle steadies on the target's right temple. I exhale, halfway, and squeeze the trigger with glacial slowness. The rifle bucks violently against my shoulder as the massive round tears downrange at 850 meters per second. Through the scope, I watch the commander's head disintegrate in a pink mist. His body crumples as his subordinates dive for cover, frantically searching for the source of the shot. "Target down," I report unnecessarily. Think his friends are upset? Seems that way, Baranov replies dryly as AK fire begins stitching the hillside around our position. Almost like they took it personally. I can't help but grin as we begin our rehearsed withdrawal. Just another day at the office. For GRU Spetsnaz in the Chechen mountains, where the hours are terrible, the accommodations worse, and the clients express their dissatisfaction by trying to ventilate you with Soviet-era weaponry. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been enjoying the relative luxury of our forward operating base, near Konkala. By luxury, I mean having access to hot water and food that hadn't come from a vacuum-sealed pouch. The kind of amenities that pass for civilization when you spend most of your time lying motionless in frozen mud, waiting for the perfect moment to end someone's life from a kilometer away. Major Kovalev had summoned me to the operations center, a glorified shipping container filled with maps, communications equipment, and the distinctive smell of too many unwashed operators in too small a space. "Volkov," he greeted me, cigarette dangling from his lips in defiance of regulations. "How's our favorite artist?" The artist nickname had stuck after a particularly creative shot in Dagestan had removed a local warlord's face while leaving, the back of his head intact. My colleagues found it hilarious that the man's open casket funeral featured a closed casket for unexplained reasons. "Just enjoying not being shot at temporarily, Comrade Major," I replied. "I assume you're about to change that?" Kovalev's weathered face creased into something approximating a smile. "Your powers of deduction are why we pay you the big rubles, Volkov." He gestured to a map of southern Chechnya where the mountains created a natural fortress that had sheltered resistance fighters since the First War. "Intelligence indicates Shamil Tausuyev has established a training camp here," he said, pointing to a valley near the Georgian border. "He's responsible for the IED network that's killed 23 of our men in the past month. Command wants him removed from the equation. I studied the terrain, severe elevation changes, heavy forest cover, minimal approach routes. A sniper's dream and nightmare simultaneously. Perfect for concealment, hellish for extraction if things went sideways." "Insertion method?" I asked, already calculating ranges and load requirements. "My 8 will take you to the southern ridge," Kovalev replied. "From there, you'll proceed on foot to establish a hide site overlooking the camp. Standard 2-man team, you and Baranov." Sergeant Ivan Baranov was my regular spotter, a taciturn Siberian with uncanny observational skills and the patience of a Buddhist monk. Together, we had 17 confirmed kills in the current campaign. Not that anyone was officially counting, since most of our operations existed in the gray zone between military action and state-sanctioned assassination. "Rules of engagement?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Kovalev's expression hardened slightly. "Terminate with extreme prejudice. No witnesses, no prisoners, no evidence of our presence. Standard procedure for GRU operations. We were ghosts, we didn't exist, and neither did the things we did to people Moscow wanted dead. Timeline? You deploy tomorrow at 0400. Weather forecast shows a 3-day window of clear conditions before the next storm system. Make it happen within that window." I nodded, already mentally inventorying the equipment we'd need. The KSVK for the primary target, VSS Vintores suppressed rifles for any necessary follow-up work, field rations, observation equipment, camouflage materials. "One more thing," Kovalev added as I turned to leave. "FSB reports civilian presence in the camp, family members of fighters and local supporters. Command doesn't care about collateral damage, but..." He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The unspoken directive was clear. Civilian casualties were acceptable but unnecessary. Precision was preferred, not out of humanitarian concern, but to minimize potential political complications, the familiar moral ambiguity of our profession. "Understood," I replied simply. "We'll be surgical." The next morning found Baranov and me aboard an ancient Mi-8 helicopter, swaying through mountain passes in the pre-dawn darkness. The loadmaster, a grizzled warrant officer with vodka on his breath despite the early hour, gave us a thumbs up as we approached the insertion point. 10 minutes, he shouted over the rotor noise. "Weather at the LZ is clear, minus 15 degrees. Wind from the northeast at 5 knots. I nodded acknowledgement, checking my equipment one final time. The KSVK, broken down and secured in a custom backpack. The Vintores, similarly disassembled. Ammunition, rations, communications gear, observation equipment. Everything meticulously prepared. Nothing left to chance. Baranov sat opposite me, eyes closed in what might have been meditation or simply the catnap of a soldier trained to sleep whenever opportunity presented. His face betrayed nothing of his thoughts, a quality I'd come to appreciate during our partnership. The helicopter flared to a hover over a small clearing, rotors whipping snow into miniature blizzards. We fast roped down, immediately moving to the tree line as the aircraft lifted away, leaving us alone in the vastness of the Caucasus wilderness. "Home, sweet home," I muttered, surveying the snow-covered terrain stretching before us. "Just like the resort brochure promised?" Baranov's mouth twitched in what passed for a smile. "At least the neighbors won't bother us." We began our movement toward the target area, maintaining noise and light discipline despite being kilometers from the nearest human presence. The forest was eerily silent, the snow dampening ambient sounds and creating an illusion of isolation that could prove fatal if believed too completely. The journey took 9 hours, a grueling trek through steep terrain, deep snow, and temperatures that froze the moisture of our breath into ice crystals on our balaclavas. By late afternoon, we had reached our primary observation point, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent sight lines to the valley below, while offering concealment among natural features. Through high-powered optics, we could see the camp, a collection of stone buildings and semi-permanent structures. Approximately 15 fighters visible, moving with the disciplined spacing of trained combatants rather than the clustered patterns of irregular militia. Several women and children also present, confirming the FSB intelligence about civilian presence. "I count 3 sentries," Baranov murmured as he sketched the camp layout in his weatherproof notebook. "Rotating positions every 2 hours. Main building likely serves as command post. Target not yet visible. We wait," I replied simply, and wait we did. For 36 hours we maintained continuous observation, cataloging patterns of movement, identifying key personnel, confirming the presence of our target, Shamil Tasuyev, distinguishable by his height and distinctive limp from a wound sustained in the First War. We established our firing position 200 meters east of our observation post, a natural depression reinforced with local materials, virtually invisible unless you stepped directly into it. The KSVK was assembled and zeroed during brief periods when the camp's attention was focused elsewhere. By the morning of the 3rd day, we had compiled everything needed for a successful operation: range cards for various targets, wind calculations for different times of day, primary and secondary firing positions, extraction routes. The only variable remaining was the optimal moment to eliminate Tasuyev with minimal risk to non-combatants. That moment presented itself unexpectedly when a vehicle arrived at the camp, a battered UAZ jeep carrying what appeared to be a weapons shipment. Tasuyev emerged from the main building to personally inspect the delivery, positioning himself perfectly for a shot with no civilians in the immediate vicinity. The subsequent execution of the mission, the perfect shot, the explosive impact of the high-caliber round, the chaotic response from the fighters below, brought us to our current situation: a rapid withdrawal under sporadic fire from very unhappy Chechens. "They're organizing a pursuit team," Baranov notes calmly as we create distance between ourselves and the kill zone. 6 fighters moving up the eastern slope. "How inconsiderate," I reply, navigating through dense pine forest. "Don't they know we're on a tight schedule?" The standard extraction plan calls for us to reach designated coordinates 18 kilometers northwest, where helicopter recovery would occur during the night's darkest hours. But standard plans rarely survive contact with motivated enemies. We need to disrupt their pursuit, I decide, scanning the terrain ahead. That ridgeline offers a good overwatch position. Baranov nods his agreement, already understanding my intention. "We're not just running. We're setting an ambush for our ambushers, turning the hunters into prey. We move with practiced efficiency to the elevated position, quickly establishing firing lanes while erasing evidence of our passage. The pursuit team will follow our initial trail, expecting us to maintain maximum speed toward extraction. Instead, we'll deliver a nasty surprise from their flank." 280 meters to the game trail, Baranov murmurs, setting up his own. "Ventures. They should appear in approximately 12 minutes if they maintain current pace." "Want to place a bet on how many we drop before they figure out what's happening?" I ask, settling behind my rifle. "That would be unprofessional, Lieutenant," he replies with mock seriousness. "But 3. Definitely 3. The Chechen fighters appear exactly where predicted, moving with the caution of experienced mountain combatants but betrayed by their haste. Their leader gestures forward, following footprints we deliberately left before diverging to our ambush position. I center my crosshairs on the leader's chest, control my breathing, and squeeze the trigger. The Vintorez whispers death through its integrated suppressor. 280 meters away, the Chechen commander crumples without a sound. Confusion ripples through the remaining fighters. They heard no shot, saw no muzzle flash, have no idea where the attack originated. Perfect. Baranov and I work methodically, dropping 2 more fighters before the survivors finally determine our approximate position and return fire. By then, we're already moving to our secondary position, circling behind their advance while they waste ammunition on our abandoned hide site. "That's 3, Baranov notes with satisfaction. "You owe me a bottle of Stolichnaya." "I don't recall accepting that bet, Sergeant," I reply as we navigate a steep ravine. "Besides, it's not sporting when the other team doesn't know they're playing." The remaining pursuers continue searching for us as darkness falls, but their enthusiasm has been considerably dampened by losing half their number to an invisible enemy. Eventually, they withdraw toward their camp, unwilling to continue the hunt in unfamiliar terrain after nightfall. We maintain our movement through the night, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous landscape. The temperature drops to -25, creating a new enemy more implacable than any Chechen fighter. Cold seeps through our insulated clothing, numbing extremities and clouding judgment. Survival now depends as much on resistance to the elements as tactical skill. "Extraction point in 2 kilometers, Baranov announces after checking our GPS coordinates. "We're ahead of schedule." "Wonderful," I mutter through chattering teeth. More time to enjoy the scenic winter wonderland. We reach the extraction point, a small plateau suitable for helicopter landing, with 2 hours to spare before our scheduled pickup. Now comes the most dangerous part of any sniper operation: sitting still, exposed, waiting for extraction, while physically exhausted and mentally drained. We establish a defensive position within the tree line, alternating watch to allow brief periods of rest. Neither of us truly sleeps, just a state of reduced alertness that passes for rest among those who know true sleep would mean death in this environment. "You know what I miss most about Moscow right now?" I ask during one of these pseudo-rest periods. "The ballet?" Baranov suggests dryly. "The public toilets," I reply. "Even the disgusting ones near Kursky Station. True luxury is not having to dig a hole in frozen ground every time nature calls." Baranov's silent chuckle fogs the air between us. "Such refined tastes, Lieutenant. No wonder they say GRU officers are the cultural elite of the armed forces." The banter continues intermittently, a psychological defense mechanism against the cold, the fatigue, the knowledge that we're alone in hostile territory with a very small margin for error. Dark humor has always been the Russian military's coping strategy, dating back to times when our grandfathers faced Nazis across similar frozen landscapes. At precisely 02:15, the faint sound of rotor blades reaches us. The extraction helicopter appears as a darker shape against the night sky, running without lights to minimize detection risk. We activate our infrared beacon for 30 seconds, just long enough for the pilots to confirm our position before setting down in a swirl of snow and downdraft. The Loadmaster, a different one than our insertion, but sharing the same weathered indifference, helps drag our half-frozen bodies aboard. "Successful hunt?" he shouts over the engine noise. One less terrorist mastermind breathing our air, I confirm as Baranov secures our equipment. Though, I think I lost several toes to frostbite, so it's a net population decrease either way. The helicopter lifts off, banking sharply to follow terrain masking back to friendly territory. In the relative warmth of the cabin, the adrenaline that has sustained us for days finally ebbs, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and the peculiar emptiness that follows mission completion. Back at base, we endure the standard debriefing, detailed, recounting of the operation, intelligence gathered, ammunition expended, enemy casualties inflicted. Major Kovalev listens with his usual impassive expression, occasionally noting details in his worn leather notebook. "Clean work," he comments. "When we finish, Moscow will be pleased. Take 48 hours, then report for your next assignment." Just like that, one mission ends, another waits in the wings. No ceremony, no recognition, just the routine machinery of state-sponsored killing grinding forward relentlessly. In the officers' quarters, I finally allow myself the luxury of a scalding shower, watching as 3 days of camouflage paint, sweat, and grime swirl down the drain. My reflection in the steamed mirror shows a face I sometimes struggle to recognize. Eyes too old for their years, expression carefully neutral even in private. Baranov finds me later in the makeshift canteen, where I'm contemplating a glass of industrial-strength samagon provided by our unit's quartermaster. To Shamil Tasuyev, he proposes, raising his own glass. May he enjoy explaining to Allah why he thought it was a good idea to blow up Russian soldiers. To physics, I counter, specifically the terminal ballistics of 12.7mm rounds against human craniums. We drink, the moonshine burning a fiery path to stomachs too long subsisting on field rations and melted snow. Neither of us mentions the civilians in the camp, the women and children who witnessed our handiwork and will carry that memory forward. Some lines of conversation remain untouched even between men who trust each other with their lives. Instead, we discuss plans for our brief respite. Sleep features prominently, as does proper food and possibly female companionship if any can be found in this military wasteland. Normal things, deliberately mundane. A conscious step away from the realm of long-range death-dealing we inhabit professionally. Tomorrow or the next day, we'll receive new coordinates, new photographs, new dossiers. Another target designated for elimination by faceless authorities in distant Moscow. And we'll go, without question or hesitation, because that's what we were trained for, selected for, molded into. We are GRU Spetsnaz snipers, Russia's long-distance problem solvers. When diplomacy fails and conventional military action is too overt, they send men like us to isolate and remove specific threats with surgical precision. Or, as Baranov more colorfully puts it, to make problems go away with a loud noise from very far away. As I drain my glass, I consider the peculiar morality of my profession. I don't hate the men I kill. Most I never meet beyond the impersonal relationship between crosshairs and target. I don't question the reasons behind their designation as threats. That burden belongs to those who issue the orders. I simply solve the physics problem presented, how to deliver a precisely calculated amount of energy to a specific point in space at a specific moment in time. The fact that this solution results in exploding watermelon heads is simply an occupational hazard for them, not me. Another? Baranov asks, holding up the bottle of clear liquid that could double as paint thinner. Why not? I reply. It's not like we have to shoot straight tomorrow. We drink to absent comrades, to successful missions, to the dark humor that keeps us functional in a profession that would otherwise corrode the soul entirely. And somewhere in the mountains behind us, a new commander assumes leadership of the group we targeted, beginning the cycle anew. Such is the nature of this endless, bitter conflict. One head explodes, another takes its place. But that's a philosophy problem, not a physics one. And I've always been better at physics. Captain Sergei Nechayev, 33 years old. Vimpel Detachment, FSB. Born in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. The dead paratrooper's eyes follow me through the forest, frozen open in permanent surprise, blue irises standing out against bloodless skin in the crimson snow beneath his shattered body. He shouldn't be here. This ridge was supposedly secured yesterday. Yet here he lies, just another sacrifice to the mountains of Argon. Another soul added to the invisible congregation that haunts these peaks. Movement, whispers Lebedev, my second in command, from somewhere to my right. But when I turn to look, he isn't there. Just more trees, more snow, more swirling, mist that transforms the landscape into something from a fever dream. I blink, trying to clear my vision. 72 hours without proper sleep, operating on stimulants and freeze-dried coffee. Reality has become elastic, stretching, and contracting with each labored heartbeat. The mission parameters remain clear in my mind. Locate and extract the surrounded Pskov paratroopers, guide them through Chechen lines, deliver them to the extraction point. Simple objectives rendered nearly impossible by terrain, weather, and an enemy that moves through these mountains like ghosts. The radio crackles with fragmented transmissions. 6th Company under heavy fire, requesting immediate support. Coordinates. Static consumes the rest, the mountain swallowing radio waves as hungrily as they swallow men. I press forward, my 6-man Wimpel team spreading out through, the trees in a practiced formation that feels increasingly irrelevant. The rules of conventional warfare don't apply in Ulus-Kert. Here, the very land seems alive and hostile, conspiring with the Chechen fighters to erase us from existence. The mist parts momentarily, revealing a ridgeline perhaps 500 meters ahead. Figures move across it, soldiers in Russian uniforms. Salvation? The paratroopers we seek? Or another hallucination born of exhaustion and the strange acoustics of these mountains, where gunfire can sound like whispered conversations and the wind mimics human screams with unsettling precision. I raise my hand, signaling the team to hold position while I verify through optics. Through my scope, the distant figures waver and distort, their movements jerky and unnatural. Then the mist closes again, and they vanish as if they never existed. "Did you see them?" I ask Lebedev, who has materialized beside me like a conjurer's trick. "See what?" he replies, eyes scanning the ridge where nothing now moves except drifting snow and skeletal tree branches. I don't answer. In this phantom forest, certainty is a luxury none of us can afford. We continue forward, each step carrying us, deeper into the heart of a battle already infamous for its brutality, where the line between the living and the dead has worn thin as tissue paper, and reality itself seems to have surrendered to the chaos of war. The operation had begun 48 hours earlier at our forward base in Kankala. The briefing room was crowded with maps and intelligence officers when our team arrived. 6 Wimpel operators pulled from rotation for an emergency extraction mission. Colonel Voronin, our detachment commander, looked like he hadn't slept in. So his normally precise briefing was terse and fragmented. The 6th Company of the 76th Guards Airborne Division is cut off on Height 776, he explained, pointing to a nondescript contour line on the tactical map. They're surrounded by Katab's main force, at least 500 fighters, attempting to break through to Dagestan. The implications were immediately clear to everyone in the room. The Pskov paratroopers had stumbled into a major Chechen formation, experienced fighters led by the notorious Saudi commander Katab and Chechen warlord Basayev. A catastrophic encounter for a single company of young paratroopers. Current status? I asked, already calculating approach routes and extraction options. Voronin's expression darkened. Last transmission reported multiple casualties and dwindling ammunition. They're holding their position but won't last another day without support. Artillery and air assets are constrained by weather conditions. He paused, his finger tracing a circuitous path through the mountainous terrain. Your mission is to infiltrate through Chechen lines, establish contact with any survivors, and guide them to this extraction point where helicopters will attempt recovery if weather permits. And if weather doesn't permit? Asked Lebedev, voicing what everyone was thinking. Then you get them out on foot, Voronin replied simply. Your Wimpel team has the best mountain warfare experience and local terrain knowledge. If anyone can reach them, it's you. The unspoken subtext hung in the air. This mission was likely futile, a desperate attempt to salvage something from an already unfolding tragedy. But Wimpel didn't refuse missions, no matter how suicidal. We deployed within the hour, inserting via helicopter at the maximum distance the weather allowed, still nearly 15 kilometers from the besieged paratroopers' position. From there, we would proceed on foot through terrain so hostile that even the specialized maps we carried seemed like optimistic abstractions rather than accurate representations. The first day passed in grueling movement through deep snow and dense forest. We encountered no resistance but heard distant gunfire echoing strangely through the valleys, impossible to pinpoint, sometimes seeming to come from all directions simultaneously. Radio contact with headquarters deteriorated as we pushed deeper into the mountains. Transmissions became fragmented, distorted, sometimes interspersed with voices speaking languages none of us recognized. The electromagnetic anomalies of the Caucasus Mountains were well documented, but knowing the scientific explanation did nothing to diminish the unsettling effect. By the second day, the weather had deteriorated further. Visibility reduced to mere meters, temperatures dropping to -30 with wind chill. We moved by compass and dead reckoning. Each landmark reached a minor victory against geography and physics. It was during this phase that I first noticed the peculiar quality of the forest around us. The way shadows seemed to linger after whatever cast them had moved on. The strange acoustics that carried whispers from nowhere while swallowing the sound of our own footsteps. The sensation of being watched by eyes hidden in the swirling whiteness. You feel it too, Lebedev observed quietly as we paused to check our bearings. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded, unwilling to articulate the growing sense that we were moving through something more than mere physical terrain. These mountains had witnessed centuries of violence, from Imperial Russian conquests to Stalin's brutal deportations to the savage fighting of the First Chechen War. Perhaps something of that history had seeped into the land itself, creating a palimpsest of suffering that remained perceptible to those walking its surface. Or perhaps it was just sleep deprivation and the altered consciousness that comes with extreme environmental conditions. The rational explanation comforted me, even as it failed to convince. We encountered the first body shortly before dusk on the second day, a Chechen fighter frozen in death, his blood crystallized around bullet wounds that had blossomed like dark flowers across his chest. There were no tracks around him, no signs of how he had come to die alone in this empty stretch of forest. Recent, murmured our medic Kozlov after a brief examination. No more than 12 hours. We continued with heightened vigilance, moving now through terrain that showed increasing signs of combat. Spent cartridges half buried in snow, abandoned equipment, occasional blood trails ending in empty space. Yet we encountered no living combatants from either side. That night, huddled in a makeshift shelter, we monitored radio frequencies for any transmission from the paratroopers. What we received instead were disjointed fragments that made little tactical sense. They keep coming. Hundreds of them. Ammunition almost gone. Sixth Company standing firm. Position must be held. No longer human. What they become in the mist. I attributed the increasingly delirious content to the psychological effects of prolonged combat, sleep deprivation, and possible wounds. The paratroopers were youngsters mostly, conscripts and contract soldiers facing their first real combat under horrific conditions. Their perception of reality would naturally distort under such pressure. What troubled me more deeply was the timestamp on these transmissions. According to our intelligence, they had been sent nearly 24 hours earlier. Yet they came through with the clarity of real-time communication, not recorded playback. The third day dawned gray and forbidding, bringing us to the present moment, moving through forests where dead men watch with accusatory eyes, where comrades appear and disappear in the mist, where nothing can be trusted, not even one's own senses. We reach the base of Height 776 as afternoon fades toward another impenetrable night. The sounds of battle have ceased entirely, replaced by a silence so profound it seems to have physical weight. The mist has thickened into a tangible presence that clings to our skin and equipment like spectral fingers. Spread out, 5-meter intervals, I order quietly. Approach from multiple vectors. Report any contact immediately. My team dissolves into the whiteness, highly trained operators vanishing as completely as if they never existed. I advance up the slope, every sense straining for input. The AKSU carbine in my hand seems to grow heavier with each step, its familiar contours becoming somehow alien against my gloved fingers. The first sign of the paratroopers' last stand emerges from the mist like a macabre art installation, A defensive position constructed of stones, fallen trees, and frozen corpses. Russian and Chechen bodies intermingled in death, arranged in concentric circles around a central point. Some still clutch weapons. Others lie with arms outstretched, as if reaching for salvation that never came. "Command, this is Nechayev," I whisper into my radio, knowing even as I speak that no response will come. We've reached height 776, signs of extensive combat, proceeding to locate survivors. Static answers, punctuated by what might be voices or merely the random noise of atmospheric interference. I continue forward, stepping carefully between the dead, noting with professional detachment the evidence of how fiercely the paratroopers had fought. The spent cartridges numbering in the thousands, the empty RPG tubes, the blood-stained bandages indicating attempts to treat wounds even. As the perimeter contracted, at the center of the position, I find what remains of the command element. A young lieutenant still clutching a blood-stained map, a radio operator slumped over his equipment, a senior sergeant whose body bears so many wounds, it's impossible to determine which finally killed him. No survivors, just the silence and the mist and the dead. "Captain," calls Lebedev's voice from somewhere to my left. "You need to see this." I follow the sound to find him standing before a peculiar arrangement. Russian and Chechen dead, positioned in a perfect circle around a small clearing. At the center, a single paratrooper sits upright against a rock, apparently unharmed amid the carnage. His eyes are open, staring at something only he can see. "Is he," I begin, approaching cautiously, "alive?" "I don't know," Lebedev replies, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. He doesn't respond to stimulus, but he's warm, no visible wounds. I kneel beside the soldier, a young private according to his insignia, probably no more than 19. His breathing is so shallow it's barely perceptible, his pupils dilated to the point where iris is merely a thin blue ring around bottomless black. His lips move in what might be prayer or simply involuntary muscle spasms. "Private," I say, gently shaking his shoulder. "Private, can you hear me? We're here to extract you. Are there other survivors?" His head turns with mechanical slowness until his eyes meet mine. For an instant, I feel vertigo so intense I nearly fall, as if looking into his eyes has somehow connected me to whatever he perceives. Images flash through my mind too quickly to process. Figures moving through mist, hundreds of fighters, charging uphill, paratroopers fighting back-to-back, ammunition dwindling, wounds multiplying, and then something else. Something emerging from the mist that makes no sense within any tactical framework I recognize. I pull back instinctively, breaking the connection. The private's gaze returns to the middle distance, his lips resuming their silent monologue. "Gather anything of intelligence value," I order, my voice steadier than I feel. "Kozlov, prepare the private for transport. Even if he's the only survivor, we're taking him out." The team moves with practiced efficiency despite the surreal circumstances, collecting documents, weapons, equipment. Professional focus provides an anchor against the disorienting influence of this place. "Captain," calls Volkov, our communications specialist. "I've got something on VHF frequency. Well, you should hear it yourself." He offers his headset, expression troubled. I listen to a clear transmission. Multiple voices reporting status, requesting support, describing enemy movements. The voices of dead men whose bodies lie around us. The transmission timestamp indicates it's occurring now, in real time. I remove the headset, returning it without comment. Some phenomena defy explanation, particularly in these mountains where reality seems more suggestion than law. "We move out in 5 minutes," I announce, focusing on practical concerns. Standard extraction formation. The private is our priority. If we encounter resistance, we engage only as necessary to break contact. The team acknowledges, preparing for departure even as the light fades completely from the sky. Night vision equipment transforms the landscape into shades of green, but somehow fails to penetrate the peculiar quality of the mist, which seems to glow with its own internal luminescence. We begin our descent from height 776, carrying the unresponsive private and the burden of what we've witnessed. The forest receives us again, branches reaching like spectral limbs, shadows moving, independently of what casts them. The mountain surrenders us with apparent reluctance, strange acoustics creating the impression of voices calling us back, of footsteps following just beyond the range of visibility. The extraction point lies 10 kilometers southwest, a journey that should take 8 hours under these conditions. But time, like everything else in these mountains, has become unreliable. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours, then compress suddenly as we find ourselves covering ground with inexplicable speed. Twice we encounter Chechen patrols that seem not to see us, even as we freeze in positions that offer minimal concealment. The fighters pass within meters, conversing in low voices, weapons ready. Yet their eyes slide over us as if we've somehow become part of the landscape itself. "They can't see us," whispers Kozlov after the second such encounter, his voice tinged with something between wonder and terror. "It's as if we're—" "Focus on the mission," I interrupt sharply. "Maintain formation and security protocols." But his unfinished sentence lingers in my mind as if we're ghosts, as if Height 776 and whatever happened there has somehow changed us, rendered us partially removed from conventional reality. An absurd notion born of exhaustion and stress, yet one that takes root in my consciousness with disturbing persistence. The private we carry remains catatonic, occasionally mumbling sequences of numbers or fragments of prayer. His body temperature remains unnaturally high despite the bitter cold, as if whatever experience burned itself into his mind continues to smolder physically. We reach the extraction point as false dawn begins to lighten the eastern sky. The designated landing zone appears empty, undisturbed by any human presence. The radio yields only static when we attempt to contact the extraction helicopters. "Establish defensive perimeter," I order automatically. "Volkov, keep trying different frequencies. The weather may have delayed the helicopters." The team complies with mechanical efficiency, though I sense growing unease in their movements and expressions. We've all experienced the same journey. Through a landscape that defies rational explanation, all felt the same sense of altered reality. Professional discipline holds us together, but beneath that veneer, certainties have begun to crumble. An hour passes with no contact, no helicopter, no indication that anyone knows or cares about our presence in this empty clearing. The mist thins slightly with warming temperature, revealing more of our surroundings. Unremarkable forest that somehow feels less threatening in daylight. Then Lebedev, keeping watch on our northern perimeter, stiffens suddenly. "Movement," he reports quietly. "Multiple figures approaching from the north. Stand by." We assume defensive positions, weapons trained toward the potential threat. Through my scope, I watch as figures emerge from the tree line. Russian soldiers in standard winter camouflage, moving with the disciplined spacing of special operations forces. For a surreal moment, I wonder if we're observing ourselves from some impossible perspective. Then recognition dawns as I identify the lead officer, Major Kuznetsov, commander of the Spetsnaz detachment that had been operating north of our insertion point. "Hold fire," I order, standing cautiously. Friendly forces approaching. The Spetsnaz team reacts to our presence with professional caution, securing the area before their commander approaches, Captain Nechayev. Kuznetsov seems surprised. "We weren't informed of Vimpel operating in this sector." "Extraction mission," I explain simply. "6th Company on Height 776. His expression changes subtly, concern and confusion mingling. "Height 776? We just came from there. Complete loss, no survivors. We were conducting recovery of remains." A chill that has nothing to do with the ambient temperature runs through me. That's impossible. We were just there. We found one survivor. I turn to indicate the private, only to discover empty space where he should be, where all my team should be. Kuznetsov's hand moves subtly toward his sidearm. "Captain, you're alone. There's no one with you." For the first time, I truly look at myself. My uniform shows no signs of the 3-day journey through mountain wilderness. My equipment is clean, seemingly unused. Even the chronometer on my wrist shows a date 3 days earlier than my mind insists it should be. "I don't understand," I say, the words inadequate against the yawning void of comprehension that opens before me. Kuznetsov studies me with the careful neutrality of a man assessing a potential threat or psychiatric case. You were reported missing during initial insertion. Your helicopter never reached the designated LZ. Search teams found wreckage yesterday. You were presumed dead with the rest of your team. His words wash over me like ice water, bringing neither clarity nor closure. Only questions for which I suspect there are no rational answers. Questions about the nature of reality in these mountains, where the dead speak on radio frequencies and the living vanish like morning mist. Later, in the sterile confines of a military hospital, doctors will diagnose hypothermia, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress. They will explain my experiences as hallucinations born of physical trauma and survivor's guilt. They will tell me I was found wandering alone, the sole survivor of a helicopter crash that killed my entire team before the mission even began. Their explanations will be reasonable, scientific, comforting in their orderly rationality. I will accept them publicly, nod at appropriate intervals during debriefings, take the prescribed medications, but in private moments, I will remember the eyes of the dead paratrooper watching me through the forest. The perfect circle of bodies, around an unharmed private who vanished like smoke, the Chechen fighters who looked through us as if we weren't there, and sometimes in the space between wakefulness and sleep, I will hear fragments of radio transmissions, young voices reporting positions, confirming kills, requesting support. That never came. The voices of the 6th Company, still fighting their endless battle on Height 776, forever dying, but never truly dead in the mountains of Ulus-Kert, where reality itself has surrendered to the chaos of war. Aslan Zakayev, 33 years old, sniper, Grozny Defense Group, Chechen Resistance, born in Argon, Chechnya. The concrete dust settles on my scope like a fine gray snow, each particle a potential betrayer of my position if it catches the light wrong. I brush it away with a soft piece of chamois leather, my movements deliberate and minimal. The Russian patrol won't appear for another 17 minutes if they maintain their pattern, but discipline separates the living snipers from the dead ones. I've survived 4 months in this collapsed city by treating every second as if an enemy scope is trained on me. Through my PSO-1 scope, I survey the intersection, 320 meters from my position. The shot itself is not particularly challenging, a flat trajectory with minimal wind interference through the urban canyon. What makes it deadly is the aftermath, the hasty repositioning through Russian-controlled sectors, the predetermined route that might already be compromised, the exhaustion that comes from 20 hours without sleep in minus 20-degree temperatures. I adjust my position slightly, easing the pressure on my elbows where they contact the frozen concrete. The SVD Dragunov feels like an extension of my arms after so many weeks. We've developed an intimate relationship, this rifle and I. I know its voice, the precise way it barks when the 76 2mm round leaves the barrel. I know how the stock will press against my cheek when I take the shot. I know exactly how far the crosshairs will rise before settling back on target for a follow-up if needed. My spotter, Shamil, whispers from his position 2 meters to my left. Movement at checkpoint. BTR rolling north to south. I don't acknowledge verbally. Unnecessary sound is as dangerous as unnecessary movement. Instead, I adjust my field of view to track the Russian armored personnel carrier as it lumbers through the debris-strewn street. 8 wheels, 14 5mm machine gun in the turret. Not my target today, though in different circumstances I might engage the commander if he exposed himself in the cupola. The BTR passes, and the intersection returns to its deceptive stillness. Somewhere in this wasteland that was once Chechnya's capital, a clock is ticking toward our predetermined moment. The Russians call snipers the invisible death. What they don't understand is that invisibility isn't just about camouflage. It's about patience. About becoming so still that you merge with the environment. About controlling your breathing, your heartbeat, your very existence until the only thing that moves is your trigger finger. My breath fogs slightly in the frigid air. I draw the wool scarf higher across my face, and continue my vigil, mentally reviewing the 5 potential escape routes we've identified. In this deadly chess game played across Grozny's shattered cityscape, the shot is merely the opening move. Survival depends on what comes after. I hadn't planned to become a sniper. Before the war, I studied engineering at Moscow State University, one of many Chechens who sought education in Russia proper while maintaining our distinct identity and culture. I returned to Grozny in 1994, when tensions between Chechen separatists and Russian forces were escalating toward the First War. Initially, I served as a combat engineer, using my technical knowledge to help fortify defensive positions, and later, to design and emplace improvised explosive devices. During that first brutal conflict, I witnessed firsthand how a handful of determined Russian snipers could paralyze entire Chechen units, creating fear disproportionate to their actual numbers. When federal forces withdrew in 1996 following their humiliating defeat, I devoted myself to mastering the art of precision shooting, recognizing that when the Russians inevitably returned, this skill would be invaluable. I trained initially with a hunting rifle, then graduated to a captured SVD Dragunov, standard issue for Russian designated marksmen, but a rare and precious weapon for Chechen fighters. The Dragunov wasn't a true sniper rifle by Western standards. Its effective range was limited to about 800 meters, and its accuracy couldn't match specialized systems like the American M24 or British L96, but it was reliable, durable, and used the same ammunition as our AK pattern rifles, simplifying logistics. The SVD's PSO-1 scope was particularly well-suited to urban combat. Its range-finding reticle allowed for quick distance estimation using the height of a human target, while the battery-powered illumination made twilight engagements possible. I practiced relentlessly, developing a system for calculating complex shots that accounted for temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, and the peculiar wind patterns created by urban canyons. By the time Russian forces returned in 1999, launching what they called a counter-terrorism operation, but what was clearly a full-scale invasion, I had become proficient enough to train others. We formed small sniper cells, usually pairs consisting of shooter and spotter, that operated semi-independently within the broader resistance framework. Shamil, a former competitive marksman from Gudermes, became my constant companion. Our operational approach was methodical and technical rather than emotional. While many Chechen fighters were driven by religious fervor or nationalist zeal, we approached our work with professional detachment. The Russians were not enemies to be hated, but problems to be solved through the precise application of physics and human anatomy. The early phase of the Second War demonstrated how much the Russians had learned from their previous defeat. Their advance was cautious, methodical, and overwhelming in its firepower. Artillery and airstrikes reduced much of Grozny to rubble before ground forces even entered the city. When they did advance, they moved with armor protection and in greater numbers than before. But rubble favors the defender, especially the defender who understands how to exploit the unique properties of a destroyed urban environment. Collapsed buildings created ideal shooting positions, with multiple covered approaches and excellent fields of fire. Partially destroyed structures could be navigated through paths invisible from the street level. The debris itself provided concealment. That defeated even thermal imaging systems when properly utilized. We established our first hunting ground in what had once been the Zavodskoy district, focusing on a 5-block radius where Russian forces had established a command post in a former school building. For 3 days, we conducted detailed reconnaissance, identifying patrol routes, rotation schedules, and the locations of crew-served weapons that could respond to our shots. They're predictable, Shamil observed on the 3rd day. Same routes, same times, same formation. They're begging to be shot. That predictability is deliberate, I cautioned. They're using themselves as bait, hoping we'll reveal our positions. The Russians had indeed improved their counter-sniper tactics since the First War. They now use dedicated sniper hunter teams equipped with sound-ranging equipment and thermal imagers. Taking a shot, especially from the same position twice, was tantamount to suicide, unless every aspect of the engagement and subsequent extraction had been meticulously planned. We developed a system. Identify multiple firing positions in advance. Never fire more than 2 shots from any single location. Maintain at least 3 separate escape routes from each position. Pre-position essential supplies along these routes. And most importantly, exercise infinite patience. Sometimes we would spend days in position without taking a shot because conditions weren't perfect, or the risk-to-reward calculation didn't favor engagement. This disciplined approach kept us alive while many other snipers were captured or killed. 4 months into the battle for Grozny, we had confirmed 17 kills, a modest number compared to some who claimed dozens. But each of our confirmed eliminations was a carefully selected target with military significance. Officers, radio, operators, heavy weapons crews, and in one case a Russian sniper who had grown careless in his hide position. Today's operation targeted a specific Russian officer, a captain from the Federal Security Service, FSB, who coordinated interrogations of captured Chechen fighters. Intelligence from our network indicated he would be visiting a forward command post at a predetermined time, traveling with a small security detail in a UAZ-469 utility vehicle. Our firing position was on the 4th floor of a partially collapsed apartment building that offered a clear line of sight to the intersection the vehicle would need to cross. The room we occupied had lost its outer wall to an artillery strike, but the floor remained structurally sound, and the remaining walls provided both concealment and protection from flanking observation. I had selected a precise firing location, 40 centimeters back from the edge of the collapsed wall, far enough to remain in shadow but close enough to maintain an unobstructed view of the target area. My position was prone, supported by a makeshift rest constructed from broken concrete and fabric, allowing for a stable shooting platform while minimizing my silhouette. The technical preparation was extensive. I had calculated the exact range, using both map measurements and laser rangefinder readings taken during previous reconnaissance. 320 meters to the center of the intersection, well within the Dragunov's effective range. At this distance, bullet drop would be minimal, approximately 5 centimeters, easily compensated for by holding slightly high on the target. Wind was negligible inside the urban canyon, though I had identified potential indicators, a torn banner hanging from a lamppost and light debris on the street that would reveal any sudden gusts. Temperature, at -20 Celsius, would increase the powder's burn rate slightly, potentially increasing muzzle velocity by 10 to 15 meters per second, a factor I had already compensated for in my mental calculations. The ammunition itself had been carefully selected from our limited supply, 7.62 by 54 millimeter standard issue Russian sniper rounds, not the heavier armor-piercing variants that would be overkill for this engagement and potentially compromise accuracy. Each cartridge had been inspected for signs of corrosion or manufacturing defects, and the primers checked for proper seating. My rifle had been meticulously maintained despite the challenging conditions. The barrel was clean, free of carbon buildup or copper fouling that might degrade accuracy. The action cycled smoothly, tested repeatedly during dry fire exercises conducted in the hours before we occupied our final position. The scope's adjustments had been verified against known distance reference points in our area of operations. These technical considerations weren't merely professional fastidiousness, they were survival mechanisms. In Grozny's urban combat environment, the margin between success and failure, between life and death, often came down to these minute details. Vehicle approaching from the east, Shamil murmured, interrupting my technical inventory. UAZ with FSB markings. 3 personnel visible. I shifted my attention fully to the scope, controlling my breathing with practiced precision. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. The rhythm steadied my heartbeat and eliminated micro-tremors that might affect accuracy. Through the PSO-1's reticle, I acquired the approaching vehicle. The UAZ-469 was moving cautiously, navigating the debris-strewn street at approximately 15 kilometers per hour. 2 soldiers in the front seats, 1 officer in the rear, identifiable by his uniform and the lack of a helmet. The target. Confirmed, I whispered. Target in rear passenger seat. Wind still negligible. Range 320. The intersection was the optimal engagement point. The vehicle would need to slow almost to a stop to navigate the rubble, presenting a near-stationary target. Additionally, The surrounding buildings would amplify and distort the sound of the shot, making it difficult for Russian counter-sniper teams to pinpoint our location. I made final micro-adjustments to my position, settling the crosshairs precisely, on the target's chest, center mass rather than head. While a headshot might be more dramatic, the chest presented a larger target and housed vital organs and major blood vessels that would ensure incapacitation even without immediate death. The vehicle approached the intersection, slowing as anticipated. I began my trigger press, a smooth, consistent pressure rather than a sudden pull. The culmination of all calculations, all preparations, all patience, distilled into this single mechanical action. The Dragunov barked, its report echoing across the shattered cityscape. Through the scope, I observed the round strike exactly where intended. The officer jolted backward, a spray of crimson momentarily visible against the vehicle's interior. The driver accelerated instinctively, but in his panic, struck a concrete obstacle, bringing the UAZ to an abrupt halt. According to doctrine, I should immediately relocate after a shot, but instinct and experience suggested a secondary opportunity was developing. The driver had exited the vehicle and was moving to the rear door to assist the wounded officer. The third Russian, manning the vehicle's radio, remained exposed in the front passenger seat. Second target presenting, I stated, flatly, already reacquiring through the scope. Take it, Shamil confirmed. Then immediate withdrawal. The second shot followed the first by approximately 6 seconds. An eternity in combat terms, but necessary for proper sight picture reestablishment. The radio operator collapsed over his equipment, the round having found its mark just below his body armor's upper edge. Moving, I announced, already breaking down my firing position. The rifle went into its disassembled state and into a specialized carrying case that resembled ordinary civilian luggage. The spent casings, critical evidence that could reveal our caliber and potentially our identities through ballistic matching, were collected and secured in a pocket. The shooting mat and support were abandoned, as they contained no identifying materials. Our withdrawal route had been predetermined, down through the building's interior stairwell, which remained partially intact, through a basement connection to an adjacent structure, then through a series of drainage culverts that ran beneath a Russian-controlled sector. The entire extraction would cover approximately 1,400 meters and require nearly 40 minutes of careful movement. As we navigated the treacherous route, the sounds of Russian response echoed behind us. Vehicle movements, shouted commands, the distinctive mechanical noise of BTR engines being pushed to high RPM. They would establish a perimeter, preventing escape from the immediate area, then conduct building-by-building searches focusing first on locations that offered fields of fire to the intersection, but we would be gone before that response fully materialized. The technical preparation extended beyond the shot itself to every aspect of our operation, including this critical extraction phase. Each segment of our route had been reconnoitered in advance. Each potential choke point identified and alternate, bypasses established. Each timing estimate based on practical traversal under combat conditions rather than theoretical movement rates. We reached our safe house, a basement apartment in a residential area that remained partially occupied by civilians, 43 minutes after taking the shot. The elderly Chechen woman who owned the apartment asked no questions as we entered through a concealed access point in her storage room. She simply provided hot tea and fresh bread before retreating to give us privacy. Clean operation, Shamil commented as we conducted maintenance on our equipment. Both targets confirmed. I nodded, meticulously cleaning carbon residue from the Dragunov's bolt group. The secondary target was opportunistic, technically sloppy, but pragmatically sound. He countered with a slight smile, one less radio operator coordinating operations against our people. The technical evaluation of the operation continued as we prepared for our next deployment. Range estimation had been accurate. Wind calculation proven correct. Ammunition performance, as expected. Extraction route viable, though the third segment had been partially flooded, requiring a deviation that added approximately 7 minutes to our movement time. Every engagement was a learning opportunity, each lesson potentially the difference between survival and death in future operations. We documented these observations in a small notebook using a simple cipher, not because we expected it to withstand serious cryptanalysis, but to prevent casual discovery of our methodologies if the notebook was lost or our safe house compromised. That night, as we rested in preparation for relocating to a new operational area the following day, I reflected on the technical evolution of our resistance. The First Chechen War had been characterized by emotion-driven tactics, brave but often suicidal charges against armored vehicles, ritualistic challenging of Russian positions without adequate preparation, and an over-reliance on individual courage rather than systematic approach. This second conflict was different. Fighters like us had developed a cold, professional methodology that maximized effect while minimizing risk. We studied Russian doctrine, identified vulnerabilities, and exploited them with technical precision rather than ideological fervor. The Russians called us terrorists, but in truth we had become something they understood all too well. Professional soldiers fighting with limited resources against overwhelming odds. The sniper embodies this evolution most clearly. Where many fighters measure success by rounds expended, we measure it by rounds conserved. Where they seek the dramatic gesture, we seek the invisible action that creates disproportionate effect. Where they engage directly, we shape the battlefield through selective removal of critical components from the enemy's organization. In the technical realm of distance shooting, emotion is the enemy of accuracy. Hatred makes the hand unsteady. Vengeance disrupts breath control. Ideological fervor leads to poor target selection and unnecessary risk-taking. The effective sniper must set aside these human reactions in favor of mathematical precision and tactical pragmatism. Yet beneath this technical exterior, the motivation remains. Each perfect shot, each successful operation, each day of survival is not merely professional accomplishment, but resistance against those who would erase our people and our homeland. The technical and the personal exist in uneasy balance. The cool calculation of ballistics and the burning determination to preserve our independence. Tomorrow we will move to a new sector, establish new firing positions, identify new targets, and continue our methodical resistance. The Russians have overwhelming firepower, air superiority, and seemingly endless reinforcements. But we have intimate knowledge of the terrain, the support of the civilian population, and the precision that comes from fighting for our homes rather than someone else's political objectives. In this asymmetric equation, the sniper becomes the great equalizer, the single fighter who can demoralize an entire company, paralyze operations across a neighborhood, and force the expenditure of disproportionate resources in countermeasures. With nothing more than a rifle, optical sight, and technical mastery, one person can pin down hundreds. As I drift toward sleep, I mentally review tomorrow's route, identifying potential choke points and Russian positions we'll need to avoid. The technical details, distances, timings, equipment loads, arrange themselves in my mind like pieces on a chessboard. In this deadly game playing out across Grozny's ruins, technical mastery isn't merely an advantage, it's the only sustaining factor between momentary success and eventual defeat. The Russians may eventually take Grozny. Their resources virtually guarantee it. But through technical excellence and precision application of limited means against carefully selected targets, we ensure that victory comes at such cost that it feels indistinguishable from defeat. And in that narrow margin lies the future of our resistance, a resistance measured not in emotional declarations but in the cold mathematics of sustainable asymmetric warfare. Aslan Manadyshev, 24 years old, Field Commander, Nozhay Yurt Resistance Group, born in Banoy, Chechnya. The Russian patrol dies in segments. First, the lead vehicle erupts as my command detonates the buried IED, steel and flesh becoming briefly one as the blast tears through the undercarriage. The second vehicle halts immediately, textbook reaction, but it places them perfectly in the ambush funnel. The heavy machine gun position above the road opens up, the DSHK's distinctive hammering reverberating across the valley as 12.7mm rounds tear through the BTR's thin top armor. Russian soldiers spill out like blood from a wound, seeking cover. That doesn't exist. I watched through binoculars from my position on the ridge, noting the Russians' confusion. Their radio operator frantically calls for support that won't arrive in time. Their lieutenant, visible by his uniform distinctions, attempts to organize a perimeter even as my fighters pour fire into their position from 3 sides. The discipline of Russian special forces is absent here. These are conscripts, perhaps contract soldiers at best. Their deaths will not balance the scales, but they will add weight to our side. RPG, I command into the radio. Kamzat, our best RPG gunner, sends a rocket into the surviving BTR. Secondary explosions indicate ammunition cooking off inside the troop compartment. More Russians die, their bodies illuminated by the burning vehicle. The survivors, now less than half their original number, concentrate fire on Kamzat's position, but he's already moved as trained. Russian tracers slice harmlessly through his previous location. Advance to contact, I order. Remember, 1 officer alive. My fighters move down the slopes toward the kill zone. 28 men from 3 villages in the Nozhai Yurt district. Farmers, shepherds, mechanics, students before the war. Now transformed by Russian brutality into soldiers seeking blood payment for blood debts. I shoulder my rifle and follow them toward the slaughter we've created. Today won't bring back my family, my village, or my former life, but it will extract a price from those who took them. Allah will judge who has the greater claim to justice. Until then, I collect payment in Russian lives. The origins of my war began 3 months earlier, though the conflict itself started long before. I had been studying engineering at Grozny University before the Second War erupted. When Russian forces again invaded our homeland, I returned to my village of Benoy to help protect my family. We wanted no part in the fighting. Our village had suffered greatly in the First War and had no desire to experience the same again. But neutrality is rarely permitted to the weak when the strong make war. The Zachistka came to Benoy in late February, a cleansing operation by Russian interior forces searching for insurgents. What they found instead were ordinary villagers trying to survive between hammer and anvil, between Russian occupiers and Chechen resistance. I was repairing the generator at my uncle's house when the BMPs and BTRs surrounded our village. The procedure was always the same. Men separated from women, documents checked, houses searched, young men detained for questioning. The Russian commander, a lieutenant colonel from Oman Special Police, established his command post in Idor, our village school. Your cooperation ensures your safety, he announced to the assembled villagers through a translator. Anyone harboring fighters or weapons will be dealt with according to anti-terrorism protocols. The implied threat hung in the winter air. We had all heard stories from other villages of torture, disappearances, collective punishment. The First Chechen War had taught us that Russian promises of security meant nothing. But we had no weapons, no fighters to hide. We believed our compliance might spare us. We were wrong. The searches began methodically enough. Russian soldiers moving house to house, checking documents, looking behind walls, beneath floors. Then came the first gunshots from the eastern edge of the village. A Russian patrol claimed they'd found weapons in old Mukayev's house. Impossible. The man was 80 and could barely lift his walking stick, let alone a rifle. More shots followed. Then screams. The cleansing had changed character, becoming something darker, more primal. I tried to reach my family's home, but was forced back at gunpoint by Russian soldiers establishing a cordon. What happened next exists in my memory as fragments, disconnected moments of horror that my mind cannot arrange into coherent sequence. Russian BTRs firing into houses, soldiers dragging men from their homes. The school, our command post, now a detention center where screams emerged from classrooms that once taught mathematics and literature. When the Russians finally withdrew late that night, they left behind a permanently altered reality. 17 men executed with bullets to the back of the head, 23 detained who would never be seen again, 5 houses burned to ash, and my family, my father, 2 brothers and uncle, among the missing. I found my mother and sisters huddled in the ruins of our home. Russian soldiers had taken the men, then systematically destroyed everything of value. My mother's face had aged decades in hours. She looked at me with empty eyes and said words that would define my existence from that moment forward. They said this was punishment for helping terrorists, that the men would be interrogated and released if innocent. But your father was, bleeding from his face as they dragged him away. Your brothers were beaten until they couldn't stand. The Russians had collected a blood debt from Benoy. Now I would collect one from them. Within a week, I had made contact with a resistance group operating in the Ulus-Kert district. Their commander, Shamil, had fought in the First War and understood the composition of blood debts. He listened to my story without comment, then asked one question. Are you seeking martyrdom or victory? Justice, I replied. Measured in Russian blood. He nodded once. Then you must learn to fight effectively, not merely to die dramatically. Vengeance requires skill, not just hatred. The training was brutal. Physical conditioning in mountain terrain, weapons handling, small unit tactics, improvised explosives. Many who joined the resistance thought they would immediately fight Russians. Instead, they spent weeks learning how to stay alive long enough to kill effectively. I learned to assemble and disassemble an AK-47 blindfolded, to calculate range and windage for the ancient SVD Dragunov sniper rifle, to construct anti-armor, mines from agricultural fertilizer and salvaged electronics, to move through forest without leaving signs for Russian tracking teams. More importantly, I learned patience, the essential virtue of asymmetric warfare. We couldn't match Russian firepower or numbers. Our advantage lay in choosing the time and place of engagement, in striking only when success was likely and escape possible. 3 months after the destruction of Benoy, Shamil judged me ready to lead my first operation. Intelligence from sympathetic villagers indicated a vulnerable Russian patrol regularly traveled the mountain road between Ulus-Kert and Kirchaloy, predictable routes and times, the fatal mistake of occupiers who believed themselves safe. Take 20 men, Shamil instructed. Prepare the ground, execute the ambush, then withdraw immediately to the secondary base. Capture one officer, if possible for intelligence. Allah will guide your hand. For 2 weeks we planned and prepared, studying the patrol's composition and timing, identifying ideal ambush positions, calculating fields of fire and escape routes, placing the explosives that would initiate the attack. The technical details of killing require as much precision as any engineering problem I studied at university. And now the moment of execution has arrived. The culmination of preparation, transforming into blood and fire on a mountain road. The surviving Russians have formed a small perimeter behind their burning vehicles, 7 men including their lieutenant, returning fire sporadically as ammunition dwindles. They've established communication with their base. I can see the radio operator speaking urgently, but reinforcements will take at least 30 minutes. To reach this position, we will be gone in 10. My fighters advance in fire teams, one group providing covering fire while another moves forward. Standard infantry tactics adapted to our smaller numbers and lighter weapons. The Russians recognized the pattern too late, attempting to concentrate fire on the moving elements but unable to suppress multiple approach vectors simultaneously. A Russian soldier rises to fire his underbarrel grenade launcher. Kamzats. Bullet catches him in the throat before he can release. Another tries to reach the BTR's heavy machine gun, but falls under concentrated fire from 3 directions. Their perimeter contracts further. 5 minutes, my radio man reports, tracking the estimated response time of Russian quick reaction forces. We don't have electronic intercepts like the Russians, but we know their standard procedures and response capabilities in this sector. Final assault, I order. Remember, the officer alive. We press forward with increased urgency, overwhelming the remaining defenders with fire from multiple angles. A Russian conscript attempts to surrender, dropping his weapon and raising his hands. One of my fighters, Ruslan, whose brother died in the Benoy Zachystka, shoots him regardless. I say nothing. Blood debts allow. The lieutenant and 2 remaining soldiers make a final stand behind the engine block of the destroyed lead vehicle. Their situation is hopeless, and they surely know it. But Russian officers are trained never to surrender to bandits. Their term for us regardless of our motivations or methods. Lieutenant, I call out in Russian, having learned the language during my university studies. Surrender and live. We only want information. His response is predictable. A burst of automatic, fire in my direction, and a shouted obscenity. But the exchange has served its purpose, confirming his identity and position. I signal to Kamzat, who lobs a hand grenade precisely onto their position. The explosion is followed by screams. The lieutenant wounded but alive. One soldier dead, the other incapacitated. My fighters swarm the position, securing the officer who clutches a shattered leg. The remaining Russian soldier reaches for a weapon and is immediately killed. Standard procedure. We take no prisoners except those with intelligence value. 4 minutes until response force, calls my radio man. Gather weapons and ammunition, I order. Plant the secondary devices for the response force. Prepare the prisoner for transport. The battlefield becomes a scene of practiced efficiency. Fighters strip the dead Russians of weapons, ammunition, communications equipment, and anything else of value. Others plant IEDs along likely approach routes for the Russian reinforcements. 2 men secure the lieutenant, bandaging his wounds, not from compassion, but necessity. A dead prisoner provides no intelligence. Who are you? The lieutenant gasps through pain-clenched teeth. Which group? I kneel beside him, studying his face. He's older than most officers we encounter, perhaps 40, with the hardened expression of a career soldier rather than a conscript officer. His uniform bears the patches of VDV, Russian Airborne Forces, elite troops, rather than the usual Interior Ministry forces. We are the dead of Benoy, I reply simply. The fathers and brothers you took for questioning. The families whose homes you destroyed. The people you thought would be forgotten. Confusion crosses his face. I never operated near Benoy. My unit was deployed to Chechnya only last month. It doesn't matter, I tell him, and it truly doesn't. He serves the same force, wears the same uniform, enforces the same occupation. Individual innocence means nothing in a blood debt. The Russians taught us this lesson thoroughly. I stand, checking my watch. 3 minutes. Time to move. My fighters complete their tasks with practiced speed, disappearing into the forest in predetermined groups, taking separate routes. To our rendezvous point, 4 men carry the Russian officer, while 2 remain behind to observe the response force's arrival. Valuable intelligence for future operations. As we move through dense forest, I hear the approaching helicopters, Mi-24 gunships racing to support their dead comrades. They will find only corpses and perhaps more explosives if they're careless. The cycle continues. They suffer casualties, increase security measures, become more aggressive toward the local population, create more fighters for the resistance. We reach our first waypoint, a shepherd's hut abandoned since the fighting began. The lieutenant has lost consciousness from pain and blood loss. Our field medic administers minimal treatment, enough to keep him alive for questioning, nothing more. Will Shamil be pleased? Asks Kamzat as we pause briefly to reorganize. Consider the question. We destroyed a Russian patrol, captured an officer, suffered no casualties, and gathered valuable equipment. By any military measure, the operation was successful. Shamil judges by results, I reply. We hurt them and survived to hurt them again. That's all that matters now. But privately, I search my feelings for satisfaction or closure. The ambush has changed nothing fundamental. My family remains missing, my village destroyed, my former life irrecoverable. The Russians we killed cannot balance the ledger of my personal losses. Yet the action itself serves a purpose beyond revenge. It tells the Russians that occupation carries a cost paid in blood, that Chechens will not simply disappear or submit. We continue our movement through mountain terrain, following paths known only to local shepherds. The forest embraces us, concealing our passage from the helicopters that now circle the ambush site. In these mountains, we hold advantages the Russians cannot overcome with technology or numbers. By nightfall, we reach our secondary base, a complex of caves expanded and reinforced during the First War. Shamil waits at the entrance, his weathered face revealing nothing as he surveys our group. Successful? He asks simply. 7 vehicles destroyed, approximately 17 Russians killed, 1 officer captured, multiple weapons recovered. I report. No casualties on our side. He nods once, the closest thing to praise in his austere manner. The prisoner? VDV lieutenant, still alive but requiring medical attention to remain useful. Our doctor will see him, Shamil decides. Rest your men. Debriefing in 1 hour. As my fighters disperse into the cave system, Shamil gestures for me to follow him to a private alcove serving as his command post. Maps cover a rough wooden table, illuminated by battery-powered lamps. The technological gulf between our forces and the Russians is evident even here. We plan operations with paper maps and hand-drawn intelligence notes while they deploy satellite imagery and thermal detection. You performed well, Shamil says. Once we're alone, the operation was executed cleanly. Thank you, I respond, recognizing the significance of his approval. Did it ease your heart? He asks unexpectedly, his eyes holding mine. The question penetrates the armor I've constructed around my emotions. No, I admit after a moment. Nothing has changed. Nothing ever will, he says with the certainty of experience. I've fought the Russians since Afghanistan. Killed more than I can count. Watched friends and family die. The hole inside never fills, Aslan. You must accept this truth. His words strike me as both unbearable and necessary. The harsh wisdom of a man who has walked this path far, longer than I have. Then why continue, I ask, voicing the question that occasionally surfaces during dark nights between operations. Because the alternative is submission, he replies without hesitation. Because our children deserve a homeland, even if we will not live to see it. Because some debts must be paid regardless of cost. I nod, understanding the fundamental truth that drives all of us who fight. This struggle transcends personal vengeance, becoming something larger than individual suffering or satisfaction. We fight because resistance itself has meaning, regardless of outcome. Prepare your report, Shamil instructs, returning to his commander's role. We'll extract what information we can from the prisoner, then decide our next target, later. That night, after debriefing and planning for upcoming operations, I find a quiet corner of the cave to perform namaz, ritual prayer often neglected during combat operations, but essential to remembering our humanity. As I press my forehead to the earth, I whisper additional prayers for my missing family. Whether they live or die, whether I survive this war or fall in the next ambush, the blood debt continues. Russian soldiers die on mountain roads. Chechen fighters fall in forest hideouts. Civilians suffer between opposing forces. The machine of war grinds all participants equally, caring nothing for justice or motivation. Yet still I fight. Still I plan the next ambush, the next IED, the next chance to exact payment for Benoy. Because Shamil is right. The alternative is submission, and that price is higher than even the blood-soaked cost of resistance. Tomorrow we will interrogate the Russian officer, extract whatever useful information his mind contains, then decide his fate according to the harsh calculations of this conflict. More operations will follow, more Russians will die, more blood will soak into Chechen soil, and perhaps someday, if Allah wills it, the scales will balance enough for peace to become possible. Until then, I remain a mechanism of vengeance, an instrument of blood debt collection in a war without mercy or foreseeable end. Major Dmitry Voronin, 35 years old, Alpha Group, FSB Special Purpose Center, born in Ryazan, Russia. The blade enters beneath the sentry's jaw with the wet resistance of flesh giving way to steel. My gloved hand clamped over his, mouth as the blood cascades hot and thick over my fingers. His body spasms once, twice, then goes slack as the 9-inch Spetsnaz knife severs the carotid, jugular, and voice box in one practiced motion. I ease him to the ground, the corpse still pumping arterial spray and diminishing pulses that steam in the freezing mountain air. Clean, I whisper into my throat mic as I wipe the blade on the dead man's jacket before resheathing it. The killing, makes no sound beyond the wet gurgle of escaping air from the ruined trachea. Behind me, the 8 other operators of my Alpha Group detachment freeze in position, black silhouettes against the moonless night, waiting for my signal to continue. The Mom compound lies 50 meters ahead, a fortified mountain villa belonging to Shamil Basayev's most feared commander. Inside, intelligence suggests 15 to 20 fighters, including our primary target, a Saudi financier channeling Wahhabi money to the Chechen insurgency. The intel better be accurate this time. We've lost 11 men in the past month on operations, based on faulty information. I key my radio twice, the signal to advance. We move with the synchronized precision that comes from thousands of hours of training and dozens of live operations. Each man knowing exactly where to position himself, exactly where to direct his weapon, exactly how many degrees of his sector to cover. We are the elite of Russia's counterterrorism forces, the bloody tip of the FSB's spear. The first defender appears in a doorway 17 meters ahead, his AK-74 silhouetted against the interior light. Suppressed shots from 2 of my operators strike him simultaneously, one in the throat, one through the left eye socket. He drops, without a sound, the back of his skull emptying onto the wall behind him. There's no time to appreciate the marksmanship. The operation has begun in earnest now, the careful infiltration transitioning to dynamic entry. Within seconds, the quiet mountain night will transform into a slaughterhouse. These Chechen fighters and their foreign allies are about to discover the difference between their religious fervor and the cold professional brutality of Alpha Group at work. The night explodes with violence as we breach the compound. No room for hesitation now. No space for uncertainty. Only the mechanical application of extreme violence with surgical precision. Tonight we paint these mountains with the blood of enemies who have already forgotten the first rule of fighting: Russians. When we come for you in the darkness, we do not take prisoners. I joined Alpha Group, officially known as Directorate A of the FSB Special Purpose Center, in 1994, just before the First Chechen War erupted. My background was Airborne Forces, VDV, where I distinguished myself during operations in the dying days of the Soviet Union. Alpha represented the pinnacle of Russian special operations, with a selection process so brutal that 80% of candidates failed before completing the first phase. The unit had built its reputation during the Soviet era, most famously during the 1979 storming of Tajbeg Palace in Afghanistan, where they eliminated President Hafizullah Amin. Their bloodiest operation and greatest failure came during the 1995 hostage crisis in Budyanovsk, where Chechen terrorists led by Shamil Basayev seized a hospital. The botched rescue attempt left over 100 hostages dead. That failure haunted Alpha's institutional memory, creating a burning desire for revenge against Basayev and his network that permeated every operation in Chechnya. We weren't just conducting counterterrorism operations. We were settling a blood debt. My first deployment to the Chechen theater came in early 2000. By then, the second phase of the war was well underway, with federal forces having secured most of Grozny, but facing persistent insurgent activity in the southern mountains. Our detachment, 12 operators from Alpha Group's 3rd Department, was tasked with high-risk capture or kill missions targeting the insurgency's leadership structure. The operators in my team were hardened veterans. Sergeant Alexei Petrov, the breacher, had survived 3 building assaults in Grozny, each time extracting wounded comrades under fire. Lieutenant Mikhail Baranov, our communications specialist, had participated in 15 direct action missions, including the elimination of a Jordanian financier in Dagestan. Senior Lieutenant Igor Sokolov, the team's sniper, had 42 confirmed kills, mostly senior insurgent commanders targeted in their mountain hideouts. We operated from a forward base in the Vedeno region, conducting mission planning in a reinforced bunker surrounded by regular army units who provided outer perimeter security and fire support if needed. Each operation followed a similar template: intelligence gathering, elaborate mission rehearsal, nighttime insertion via helicopter or ground vehicle, direct action against the target, and immediate exfiltration. The raid on this particular compound had been planned for 8 days. FSB intelligence officers had identified it as a key meeting location for field commanders and foreign jihadists who brought funding and foreign fighters into the conflict. Human intelligence sources, often relatives of insurgents paid or coerced into cooperation, had confirmed the Saudi financier's presence along with a significant security detail. Rules of engagement? Lieutenant Baranov had asked during our final briefing. Colonel Lebedev, our commanding officer, had smiled thinly. Officially, attempt to capture high-value targets for intelligence exploitation. Eliminate armed resistance. He paused, letting the official language hang in the air, before adding, unofficially, no witnesses. These aren't regular Chechen separatists. They're foreign terrorists and their collaborators. The Kremlin wants a message sent. We understood perfectly. This would be a red operation. Maximum violence. No prisoners unless specifically designated as intelligence priorities. No evidence left behind that might create political complications. We would be judge, jury, and executioner, delivering Russia's response to the internationalization of the Chechen conflict. Our insertion came at 0200 hours, the Mi-8 helicopter dropping us 7 kilometers from the target location. The pilot, a veteran of Afghanistan, put us down in a narrow mountain clearing with less than 2 meters of rotor clearance on either side. A masterful display of airmanship that set the operation on the right footing. The approach was conducted in absolute darkness, using night vision equipment that gave us a critical advantage over the insurgents, who rarely possessed third-generation NVGs. We moved in 2x2 columns, maintaining 5-meter spacing to minimize the casualties from potential ambushes or pre-placed explosives. I still remember the cold, minus 23 Celsius, with a wind chill that cut through our specialized mountain warfare gear. The kind of bone-deep cold that makes weapons malfunction and fingers lose dexterity at critical moments. We compensated with chemical hand warmers inside our gloves and by cycling through periodic isometric exercises during movement halts to maintain circulation. The sentry I eliminated had been unexpected, not part of the intelligence briefing. His presence suggested the security posture was higher than anticipated, possibly indicating the presence of someone even more significant than the Saudi financier. I relayed this assessment to the team through hand signals, indicating increased caution as we approached the main compound. The building itself was a 3-story structure built into the mountainside, constructed of reinforced concrete with metal, shutters over the windows, an indication that its owner expected potential attacks. 2 diesel generators hummed nearby, providing power and explaining why this location had been identified despite its remoteness. The heat signature from the generators had been detected by satellite reconnaissance and confirmed by drone overflights. After eliminating the outer sentry, we moved into pre-assault positions according to our rehearsed plan. 4 operators would breach the main entrance using a shaped charge. 2 would secure the rear exit to prevent escape. 3, including myself, would enter through a side window identified as leading to the building's common area, where intelligence suggested most occupants gathered during evening hours. The breach was executed with textbook precision. The shaped charge detonated with a muffled crump, disintegrating the reinforced door and creating immediate shock and confusion among the occupants. The 2 most immediate threats, armed guards responding to the breach, were eliminated instantly by our point operators. My element entered through the side window simultaneously, having cut through the metal shutters using a portable thermal torch during our approach. The initial scene inside confirmed our intelligence. Approximately 15 fighters scattered around a large room, some sleeping on floor mats, others scrambling for weapons as the breach unfolded. What followed was the controlled violence that is Alpha Group's signature. We engaged with disciplined bursts from our suppressed AK-105s, each operator adhering to his assigned sector of fire. The specialized subsonic ammunition delivered devastating terminal effects without the supersonic crack that would carry across mountain valleys and potentially alert other insurgent groups in the area. 3 tangos down, Lieutenant Baranov reported mechanically through the tactical radio net. East corner secure. 4 eliminated, added Sergeant Petrov from the main entrance. Hallway clear, moving to 2nd floor. The efficiency of the initial breach created a momentary advantage. The surviving fighters were disoriented, unable to mount a coordinated defense. Several attempted to reach weapons caches positioned around the room, only to be cut down in controlled pairs of suppressed fire. Others froze, hands raised in surrender, though their fates had been predetermined by our mission parameters. I identified one fighter, distinctive in his Saudi-style dress rather than the typical Chechen mountain attire, attempting to destroy documents at a table near the back of the room. 3 rounds from my AK entered his torso in a tight grouping, spinning him away from the table and splattering the papers with arterial blood. He was still alive as I approached, gasping through perforated lungs, eyes wide with the realization that death had found him far from home. "English?" I asked, kneeling beside him, my knee pressing into his shattered sternum. He nodded weakly, blood bubbling at the corners of his mouth. "Tell me where Basayev is, and I will make this quick," I offered, pressing my suppressor against his forehead. "American," he gasped. "Not Saudi. CIA." The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the Saudi financier we had been briefed about. This was potentially an American intelligence officer. The implications were immediate and severe. If we had just killed a CIA operative, the diplomatic fallout would be catastrophic. "Secure that one," I ordered Sergeant Petrov, indicating one of the surviving fighters who had surrendered. "We need confirmation." As Petrov zip-tied the prisoner's hands, I searched the wounded American, finding identification that confirmed his CIA affiliation. This operation had just become infinitely more complicated. I keyed my radio to contact Colonel Lebedev at base, but before I could transmit, a new wave of violence erupted from the upper floor. "Contact! Heavy resistance second floor." Lieutenant Baranov's voice crackled through the radio, followed by the unmistakable sound of unsuppressed automatic weapons fire and grenade detonations. The fighters upstairs had organized a defense, apparently better trained and equipped than those we had encountered on the ground level. I heard the distinctive crack of .30 caliber rounds, American weapons, likely supplied through CIA channels if the dying man's identity was any indication. "Petrov, secure the prisoner and documents. Sokolov, with me," I ordered, moving toward the stairwell where the sounds of intense close-quarters battle echoed down to us. We ascended in tactical formation, using flashbang grenades to disorient defenders at the top of the stairs. The scene that greeted us was pure chaos. 3 of our operators engaged in room-to-room combat with an unknown number of well-trained fighters. The confined space negated many of our technological advantages, reducing the engagement to the most primal form of combat, men killing men at arm's length. I turned a corner to find Operator Kuznetsov struggling with a bearded fighter, both men having lost their primary weapons and now grappling for control of a knife between them. I eliminated the threat with a controlled pair to the fighter's head, the 5.45mm rounds creating a spray of bone, brain matter, and blood across the stone wall behind him. 8 to 10 fighters, Kuznetsov gasped, retrieving his weapon. Different from the others. Professional. He was right. These weren't standard Chechen insurgents, but appeared to be foreign fighters with formal military training. Their tactics were disciplined, their weaponry modern and well-maintained. As we cleared rooms, we discovered communications equipment of American and British manufacture, further confirming the international dimensions of what we had stumbled upon. In the final room, we encountered the operation's most vicious resistance. 3 fighters had established interlocking fields of fire, forcing us to expose ourselves to engage any one of them. Sergeant Ivanov was hit immediately upon entering, 50 caliber rounds from a Barrett sniper rifle nearly severing his arm at the shoulder. The massive exit wound pumped blood at an unsurvivable rate, his life emptying onto the wooden floor in seconds. "Frag out!" shouted Sokolov, tossing an RGD-5 grenade into the room. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, fragments shredding everything within the blast radius. When we entered through the smoke, we found 2 of the defenders dead, their bodies torn apart by the grenade's steel fragments. The 3rd defender, though grievously wounded, raised a pistol as I approached. My response was automatic. 3 round center mass, followed by a security shot to the head. His skull disintegrated under the impact, spraying bone fragments and brain matter across the floor. Only then did I notice he was wearing the remains of an American military-issue battle dress uniform underneath traditional Chechen attire. "Command, this is Voronin," I transmitted, surveying the carnage around us. "Building secure. 8 operators still effective. 1 KIA, 1 WIA requiring immediate CASEVAC. High-value target is not as briefed. Repeat, not as briefed. We have American involvement confirmed. How copy? The response was immediate and unexpected. Destroy all evidence. Sanitize the site completely. No documentation, no bodies, no equipment to be left intact. Exfiltration in 15 minutes at original LZ. The implications were clear. We had stumbled onto something far beyond a standard counterterrorism operation. Likely evidence of American intelligence agencies supporting, or at least liaising with Chechen insurgents. This was political dynamite that went far beyond our operational parameters. Understood, I replied. Initiating sanitization. What followed was something not taught in any military manual, but understood by every special operations team conducting deniable operations. We gathered all documents, electronic devices, and identifying materials. Explosives were placed at structural points throughout the building. The bodies were arranged in the central room, doused with accelerant, and prepared for destruction. Looked down at the CIA officer's corpse, his blank eyes staring at the ceiling, and wondered what complex geopolitical game had placed him in this remote mountain hideout, collaborating with the very insurgents Russia had branded terrorists. Whatever his mission, it had died with him in this blood-soaked room, another secret to be burned away in the fires of this shadow war. Charges set, Petrov reported. 10-minute timer. We exfiltrated with our wounded and 1 prisoner, the fighter. I had ordered secured earlier. Our dead operator, Ivanov, was carried in a field-expedient stretcher, his blood leaving a glistening trail in the snow behind us. No matter how clandestine the operation, Alpha Group never leaves its fallen behind. As Ito, we moved away from the compound toward our extraction point. The mountain night was illuminated by a massive explosion. The building collapsed inward, secondary detonations from stored ammunition creating a continuous series of blasts. By morning, nothing would remain but charred rubble and ash, all evidence of what had transpired erased from physical existence, if not from our memories. The helicopter extracted us on schedule, the pilot executing another masterful landing in the confined space. As we ascended into the night sky, I watched flames consuming the mountain hideout, reducing bodies, evidence, and questions to indistinguishable ash. Upon return to base, we were immediately segregated from other units and debriefed individually by FSB officers we had never seen before. The prisoner was taken away by men in civilian clothes. We never learned what information he provided or his ultimate fate, though it requires little imagination to guess. Our written reports were stripped of any mention of American involvement. The official record would show a successful operation against Chechen insurgents and foreign Islamic fighters. Medals were issued quietly, without the usual ceremony. Sergeant Ivanov's family received notification that he died in the line of duty, with no further details provided. 3 days later, our detachment was transferred back to Moscow, away from the Chechen theater entirely. The message was clear. We had seen something we were not meant to see, stumbled onto a layer of the conflict invisible to all but those at the highest levels of power. Years later, I still wake in the night, remembering the Americans' dying words and the implications they carried. The Chechen conflict, like most modern wars, was never as straightforward as the official narrative suggested. Behind the brutal, blood-soaked combat lay complex webs of international intrigue, competing intelligence agencies, and geopolitical calculations beyond the understanding of those of us who did the actual killing. In the end, that's the reality of special operations. We are the instruments of policies we don't create and often don't fully comprehend. We kill with precision and efficiency, trusting that those who direct our lethal skills understand the larger purpose. Sometimes that trust is misplaced. Sometimes the blood we spill serves agendas far different from those publicly proclaimed. But in the moment of combat, in that crystalline instant when life and death are separated by trigger pressure and reaction, time, such philosophical concerns evaporate like morning mist. There is only the mission, the team, and the brutal arithmetic of violence applied with surgical precision. Everything else is just politics, and politics has no place in the blood-soaked reality where Alpha Group operates. Senior Lieutenant Pavel Korchakov, 30 years old. Moscow, Oman Special Purpose Police Unit. Born in Moscow, Russia. The screaming stops, eventually. That's one of the first lessons you learn in the Zachystka operations. The cleansing raids we conduct through Chechen villages. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone falls silent when physical or psychological pain reaches sufficient intensity. Even the most hardened militant. Even the most innocent civilian. The distinction blurs after you've conducted enough of these operations. After you've searched enough homes, detained enough suspects, heard enough pleas of innocence that may or may not be genuine. I stand in the village square of Novye Atagi as the winter sun rises over the Caucasus Mountains. My men, 34 Oman officers in their distinctive urban camouflage and black berets, secure the perimeter as BTR-80 armored personnel carriers block the access roads. The villagers are being herded into the central square by other officers, men, women, elderly, children. Their faces show a practiced blankness that comes from years of these operations. They know the routine as well as we do. Comrade Lieutenant, my sergeant approaches with a clipboard. The security perimeter is established. Federal security. Service representatives are setting up the filtration point in the school building. I nod, lighting a cigarette against the biting February cold. Begin the document check and initial screening here. Any males between 16 and 60 poiri, without proper documentation, go directly to the filtration point. Anyone identified by the informants also goes. Keep the rest here until the house searches are complete. The sergeant acknowledges the order and moves off to organize the screening process. I watch dispassionately as families are separated, as young men are pulled aside for special processing, as Russian words are shouted at people who primarily speak Chechen. The familiar choreography of control and intimidation that constitutes the Zachystka. My radio crackles. This is Group 3. We found something in Sector 5. Weapons cache in a cellar. Request instructions. Detain all occupants of the house, I respond automatically. Secure the area and continue searching. I'll be there shortly. As I walk through the village streets toward Sector 5, I pass Oman officers conducting searches with methodical brutality. Furniture overturned, floorboards pried up, walls sounded for hollow spaces. The men perform their duties with blank expressions beneath black balaclavas that render them anonymous, interchangeable instruments of state power. Just like me, just like all of us who came to Chechnya believing in something and stayed long after belief became impossible. Now we're just going through the motions of security operations that secure nothing, fighting a war already lost in all but name, serving a state that will eventually forget our sacrifices as thoroughly as it has forgotten its promises. Another day in the Second Chechen War. Another Zachystka operation that will produce results for Moscow statistics, while deepening the hatred that ensures this conflict will continue long after we're gone. My first Zachystka operation had been 3 years earlier, during the initial phase of the Second Chechen War. Fresh from Moscow with a promotion to lieutenant and a transfer to the Oman Special Operations Detachment, I had arrived in Chechnya filled with patriotic certainty. The briefing before that first operation had set the tone for countless others that would follow. Gentlemen, the FSB colonel had announced to the assembled Oman and military units, we have credible intelligence that Al-Kazarovo village is harboring militants responsible for the ambush of the 74th Motorized Rifle Regiment convoy last week. Your mission is to conduct a complete security sweep, identify and detain all suspicious persons, confiscate weapons and propaganda materials, and demonstrate federal authority. He had paused, scanning our faces with cold eyes before adding, remember that these people have chosen to shelter terrorists. They are not innocent bystanders, but active participants in the insurgency. Treat them accordingly. The operation that followed had been my introduction to the reality of counterinsurgency. Operations in Chechnya. We had surrounded the village before dawn, cutting off all escape routes. As the sun rose, we began the methodical process of searching every structure, questioning every resident, detaining those who seemed suspicious or who were denounced by masked informants who accompanied us. I remember watching as a basement was discovered containing medical supplies and communication equipment. The entire family, father, mother, 2 teenage sons, an elderly grandmother, was detained for processing. Their protestations of innocence, their explanation that they had been forced to store the items by armed men who threatened their lives, fell on deaf ears. "This is how it starts," explained Captain Voronin, my commander at the time. "They claim coercion. Then if you press them, they claim complete ignorance. Finally, if you apply enough pressure, you get some version of the truth." The pressure he referred to became apparent at the temporary filtration point established in the village school. There, behind closed doors, detainees were subjected to enhanced interrogation, a bureaucratic euphemism for methods that would be called torture in any context not sanctioned by the state. I had watched, initially uncomfortable, but increasingly numb as men were beaten, subjected to electric shocks, threatened with execution, all in the pursuit of information that might or might not exist. Some confessed to being militants or supporters. Others maintained their innocence despite treatment that left them bloodied and broken. The truth became whatever resulted in the cessation of pain. "You'll get used to it," Voronin had told me, noticing my discomfort. "This is the reality of this war. There are no clean hands here." He had been right about that, at least. 3 years and dozens of Zechistka operations later, my hands were as dirty as anyone's. The idealism that had brought me to Chechnya had eroded steadily, replaced by a cynical pragmatism that allowed me to function in a system where success was measured in detention numbers and weapons seized, regardless of actual guilt or legitimate ownership. Now I commanded my own Oman detachment, leading operations identical to that first one. The faces of the villages changed, but the procedures remained constant. Surround, secure, search, detain, intimidate, extract confessions, repeat. An endless cycle producing mountains of paperwork and rivers of blood, but no resolution to the fundamental conflict. "Comrade Lieutenant, you should see this," calls the squad leader as I approach the house in Sector 5. He leads me to a cellar entrance where 2 Oman officers stand guard. Below, I find 3 more officers standing around an impressive cache of weapons, several Kalashnikov rifles, 2 PKM machine guns, a crate of grenades, and significant ammunition. "Where are the occupants?" I ask, surveying the evidence. 2 men, a woman, and 3 children, replies the squad leader, already transported to the filtration point. The men claimed no knowledge of the weapons. "They always do," I mutter, the script so familiar I could recite it from memory. "Document everything properly. The FSB will want detailed records for the prosecution." Though prosecution is another euphemism, most detainees disappear into the labyrinthine detention system, emerging months or years later, if at all. Due process exists on paper, but rarely in practice. The necessities of counterterrorism operations supersede legal niceties. At least that's what we tell ourselves. I return to the village square where the screening process continues. Several dozen men have been selected for further questioning, kneeling in the frozen mud under the watchful eyes of masked Oman officers. Their families watch from a distance, expressions carefully neutral. Displays of emotion can result in detention, so they have learned to suppress visible reaction regardless of inner turmoil. The FSB major overseeing the operation approaches me, datapad in hand. "Your men found weapons?" he asks without preamble. "Significant cache in Sector 5, I confirm. Already documented and secured. Occupants detained for interrogation." He nods, making notes. "Good. We have 11 confirmed insurgent. Supporters so far from the informant's identifications, plus another 14 suspicious cases for extended questioning. Should make for a productive day." The casual bureaucracy of his tone perfectly encapsulates what the Zechistka has become: a statistical exercise, a performance of security theater, a mechanism for demonstrating control that actually controls nothing. The weapons we find will be replaced within days. The people we detain will be replaced by others radicalized by our very actions. The cycle continues uninterrupted by any consideration of its ultimate futility. "There's a problem in Sector 7. My radio crackles. Resident refusing to comply with search procedures, barricaded inside with family. On my way, I respond, grateful for the distraction from my increasingly cynical thoughts. I find a tense standoff at a modest stone house on the village outskirts. An older man stands in the doorway, physically blocking entry to Oman officers, whose body language suggests escalating frustration. "What's the situation?" I ask the corporal in charge of the squad. "Man refuses to allow search," he reports tersely. "Claims to be a decorated veteran of the Soviet-Afghan campaign. Says we have no right to enter without specific cause." I approach the doorway, studying the man who dares defy the overwhelming force arrayed against him. He stands straight, despite his age, perhaps 60, with the weathered face of a mountain dweller and the hard eyes of someone who has seen too much conflict. "I am Senior Lieutenant Korzakov," I introduce myself. "You are required by federal anti-terrorism regulations to submit to search and document verification." "I am Aslan Kadyrov," he replies in perfect Russian. "I served the Soviet Union for 20 years. I have medals for bravery from Afghanistan. I have proper documents and nothing to hide. But I will not be treated like a criminal in my own home without cause." I notice the slight tremor in his right hand. An old injury, perhaps, or simply the strain of his defiance. Behind him, I glimpse a woman and what appears to be a teenage girl, watching with obvious fear. I have options here, all well established in Zakistka protocols. I could order my men to force entry. They would comply without hesitation. I could have Kadyrov detained for obstruction, a simple solution that would add another name to our daily statistics. I could even declare the situation a security threat and employ maximum force. Instead, I find myself asking, "May I see your documents, please?" Something like surprise flickers across his face before he reaches slowly into his pocket, producing identity papers and a veteran's certificate. The documents appear legitimate. He is indeed a decorated veteran of the Soviet Army, a former lieutenant colonel, recipient of the Order of the Red Star. "My men need to search your home," I say, returning his documents. "Standard procedure. They will be respectful of your property and family. You can observe the entire process." He studies me for a long moment, perhaps searching for deceit or threat in my expression. Finally, he steps aside. "I hold you to your word, Lieutenant. The search proceeds without incident. My men, perhaps sensing something in my demeanor, conduct themselves with uncharacteristic restraint. The house contains nothing suspicious, not even the small arms most Chechen families keep for protection. As we prepare to leave, Kadyrov speaks quietly, for my ears alone. "You know this accomplishes nothing, don't you? These raids, these detentions, they create enemies faster than you can capture them." I should report his comment as insurgent sympathy. I should add his name to the list for monitoring. Instead, I find myself responding with unwelcome honesty. "I know." His eyes hold mine for a moment longer, an uncomfortable recognition passing between us. Two men caught in a system neither created nor controls. Then I turn away, continuing the operation as protocol demands. By mid-afternoon, the Zakistka is complete. 27 detainees secured for transport to regional holding facilities. 5 weapons caches discovered. Numerous documents confiscated for intelligence analysis. By the metrics established in Moscow, a successful operation worthy of commendation. I watch as the detainees are loaded onto trucks, some bearing visible evidence of enhanced questioning, others simply numb with shock or resignation. Their families watch from behind Oman cordons, memorizing faces they may not see again for months or years or ever. "Prepare for departure," I order my sergeant. "Standard formation. Be alert for potential ambush on the return route." The BTRs rumble to life, their diesel engines breaking the unnatural silence that has fallen over the village. My men mount up with practiced efficiency, their day's work complete, their consciences, if any remain active, already constructing justifications or simply shutting down inconvenient moral considerations. As our convoy pulls out, I glance back at the village through my vehicle's armored viewport. Kadyrov stands in the square watching our departure with the same expression I had seen on countless faces across Chechnya. Not hatred, not fear, but something more disturbing. A patient certainty that we are merely the latest temporary occupiers of a land that would eventually reclaim itself, regardless of how much blood was spilled in the interim. The knowledge sits uneasily in my chest as we wind our way back toward our base in Kankala. This operation, like all others before it, has changed nothing fundamental about the conflict. We will file reports claiming success. Moscow will include our statistics in briefings about progress against the insurgency. Orders will come for the next Zachystka, the next village, the next round of detentions and confessions. Back at base, after equipment is secured and men dismissed, I sit alone in the officers' quarters with a bottle of vodka and the burden of clarity I neither wanted nor can escape. The system I serve is predicated on a lie, that security can be established through force alone, that resistance can be broken through fear, that the fundamental grievances driving the conflict can be ignored while addressing only their violent symptoms. Another officer enters, Captain Leonov from a different Oman unit. He's been in Chechnya even longer than I have. His once idealistic patriotism eroded to cynical functionality. "Heard you had a productive day," he comments, pouring himself a glass from my bottle without asking. 27 detainees. Very impressive. The colonel was pleased. "And what did we actually accomplish?" I ask, the question emerging before I can censor it. Leonov studies me with the wary expression of someone detecting dangerous idealism. "We did our job," he replies carefully. "The rest is above our pay grade." "Our job," I repeat, the words tasting bitter. Detaining people who may or may not be guilty, searching homes without warrants, confiscating property without receipts, conducting enhanced interrogations without oversight. "Careful, Pavel," he warns quietly. "That sounds dangerously like political dissent." He's right, of course. Questioning methods is permissible within narrow parameters. Questioning the fundamental strategy crosses a line that could end my career or worse. Yet the questions persist, growing louder with each Zachystka operation, each detainee whose guilt seems uncertain, each village left more hostile than before our arrival. "I joined to serve Russia," I say finally, "to protect our people from terrorism, to bring order after the chaos of the 90s. But what are we actually doing here? Creating more enemies than we eliminate, perpetuating a conflict that serves someone's purpose but not Russia's?" Leonov finishes his drink in a single swallow, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "The Chechens brought this on themselves," he says. "The standard justification we've all rehearsed countless times. They harbored terrorists. They supported separation. They killed Russians. And we've done what in response? I challenge. Flattened Grozny? Conducted Zachystka raids that alienate even moderate Chechens? Created detention centers where people disappear for months? How does any of this lead to genuine security?" He stands abruptly, unwilling to engage with questions that threaten the narrative sustaining our presence here. "You need sleep, Pavel, or reassignment. This kind of thinking helps no one." After he leaves, I sit with my thoughts and my vodka, both equally bitter companions. Tomorrow will bring new orders, new operations, new compromises. The Zachystka will continue, cleansing villages but staining souls, mine among them. The screaming stops eventually. The questions never do. Kasan Basayev, 31 years old. Vedeno Resistance Group, Eastern Front. Born in Nozhay-Yurt, Chechnya. The armored column appears exactly where our spotters predicted. Russian vehicles grinding noisily up the forest road, their exhaust, smoke hanging in the cold mountain air. I remain motionless in my position 20 meters above the road, concealed within a blind constructed of branches and earth that renders me invisible to passing troops. 6 more fighters are similarly hidden along this 500-meter stretch of road that winds through the densest part of the forest. The Russians call this area the Green Zone in their communications. We call it our killing ground. Tapro. Lead vehicle, a BTR-80 with additional armor welded to its sides, passes beneath my position, followed by 2 Ural transport trucks laden with troops and supplies. I count the seconds between vehicles, noting the undisciplined spacing. These are conscripts or interior ministry troops, not battle-hardened veterans who would maintain proper intervals to minimize casualties from ambush. I key my radio once, the signal to the team that I've identified the convoy as a suitable target. 2 responding clicks confirm that Islam and Ruslan, positioned further down the road with the RPGs, have received the message and are preparing to engage. The IED team at the center of our L-shaped ambush also acknowledges with a single click. My finger traces the curved magazine of my AKMS rifle, a weapon older than I am, inherited from my father who fought the Russians in the First War. War is our family business now, our ancestral profession. My grandfather fought the Soviet deportations in 1944. My father fought in the First Chechen War. Now I continue the tradition, defending our homeland from those who would subjugate it. There is no emotion in this observation, merely acknowledgement of reality. The Russians come, we kill them. They kill us. The forest watches impassively as it has for centuries of human conflict in these mountains. I raise my hand, counting down from 5 with my fingers as the 3rd vehicle, another BTR, approaches the designated kill zone. When my fist closes, the forest erupts with violence so sudden and complete that time itself seems momentarily suspended in the cacophony of destruction. I joined the resistance at 17, during the closing days of the First Chechen War. Too young to have participated in the major battles, I instead learned the fundamentals of guerrilla warfare from veterans who had humbled the Russian army against overwhelming odds. These men taught me that our greatest advantages were not weapons or numbers, but knowledge of terrain and the ability to choose when and where combat occurred. The forest is your ally, instructed Commander Galayev, who led our district's fighters. Learn to move through it like a native animal rather than a human intruder. The Russians will never feel comfortable here. They are city people, products of concrete and steel. This discomfort makes them predictable. The instruction proved prescient when Russian forces returned in 1999, beginning what they called counter-terrorism operations, but what was clearly a renewed attempt at conquest. This time, they came with overwhelming firepower and a willingness to destroy entire villages suspected of harboring fighters. Their brutality swelled our ranks with young men seeking vengeance for killed family members, but it also revealed a strategic weakness. The Russians still relied on roads and heavy equipment that channeled their movements through predictable corridors. Our resistance group controlled a 30-square-kilometer area in the densely forested mountains near the Dagestan border. Formally, we operated under the Eastern Front Command, but practically, we maintained significant autonomy. Our 60 fighters were almost exclusively local men who knew every trail, cave, and stream in our area of operations. Most had lost family members to Russian operations and fought with the cold determination of men with nothing left to lose. We specialized in ambushes, quick, violent engagements where we could maximize damage before melting back into the forest. The densely wooded mountain terrain provided perfect conditions for such operations. Limited visibility that negated Russian air superiority, narrow roads that canalized vehicle movement, and abundant cover for fighters both before and after engagements. The specific ambush site we had selected for today's operation was a sharp bend in the forest road where vehicles had to slow significantly. We had chosen the location after 3 weeks of methodical observation, noting Russian patrol, patterns, and timing. The position offered multiple advantages: clear fields of fire, excellent escape routes, and terrain features that would contain the Russians' initial response while we exfiltrated. Preparation began 2 nights earlier, with the careful placement of a command-detonated IED constructed from unused artillery shells, remnants of the previous war scavenged from abandoned positions. The 600-kilogram device was buried beneath the road surface at the apex of the curve, covered with soil and debris that matched the surrounding ground perfectly. Even experienced combat engineers would struggle to detect it without specialized equipment. Our 7-man ambush team moved into position before dawn, using established infiltration routes that avoided open areas which might be under aerial observation. Each fighter carried only essential equipment: weapon, ammunition, water, and minimal food. We traveled light to maximize mobility, our emergency resupply caches already established along planned extraction routes. My position overlooking the road offered both excellent observation and fields of fire. The concealment techniques we employed were not the product of formal military training, but generations of mountain warfare experience passed down through families and clans. The Russians, with all their technical sophistication, struggled to detect fighters who had been taught concealment by fathers and grandfathers who had themselves evaded Soviet forces decades earlier. The ambush was set for mid-morning, when Russian supply convoys typically moved between their larger bases. Our intelligence network, consisting primarily of civilians who monitored Russian movements while conducting normal activities, had confirmed the expected convoy through a series of innocuous-seeming coded messages passed at local markets and checkpoints. As the convoy approached, I observed the vehicles through a small gap in my concealment without using binoculars that might reflect sunlight and reveal my position. The convoy consisted of 7 vehicles, 2 BTR-80 armored personnel carriers, 3 Ural transport trucks, and 2 UAZ jeeps. Approximately 40 personnel based on standard transport configurations. The spacing between vehicles was inconsistent, sometimes as little as 20 meters, other times stretching to 50 or more. This indicated poor training or complacency, both of which worked to our advantage. Well-disciplined units maintained precise intervals that limited casualties from individual attacks while still allowing mutual support between vehicles. I waited until precisely the right moment, when the center transport truck reached the position directly above our buried IED. The detonation was precisely calibrated, the massive explosion lifting the multi-ton vehicle several meters into the air before crashing it back down as a twisted hulk of metal. Simultaneously, RPG teams engaged the lead and rear vehicles, immobilizing them and trapping the remainder of the convoy in our kill zone. From my elevated position, I engaged Russian troops as they desperately exited their vehicles, seeking cover. That didn't exist within our interlocking fields of fire. My AKMS fired on semi-automatic, each shot deliberate and placed with the calm precision that comes from thousands of practice rounds. This was not spray-and-pray combat, but the methodical application of fire against specific targets. The Russians responded with impressive volume but poor accuracy, their rounds striking trees and earth around our positions without finding human targets. Their training emphasized overwhelming firepower rather than precision shooting, an approach poorly suited to forest combat, where targets appeared only momentarily between concealing vegetation. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes, a brief violent eruption that left the forest road littered with burning vehicles and fallen soldiers. We maintained fire discipline throughout, engaging only clear targets and conserving ammunition. When the commander ordered disengagement with 3 quick radio clicks, we withdrew simultaneously along predetermined routes, moving deeper into the forest where Russian quick reaction forces would be reluctant to follow. This was the critical phase of any ambush, the extraction that determined whether a tactical success became a strategic victory or a devastating defeat. Russian doctrine called for aggressive pursuit immediately following ambushes, using helicopters and rapid reaction forces to catch fighters withdrawing from engagement areas. Our countermeasure was dispersion, 7 fighters moving along 7 different routes, regrouping only after we were certain no pursuit had been organized. My extraction route took me 3 kilometers east through the densest part of the forest, crossing 2 streams that would mask my scent from tracking dogs if the Russians deployed them. I moved at a measured pace, fast enough to create distance, but not so rapid that I became careless or exhausted myself. The AKMS was slung across my back, both hands free for navigating difficult terrain and maintaining balance on steep slopes. The forest itself became an ally during extraction, its dense undergrowth and complex terrain confounding pursuers who lacked intimate knowledge of local topography. Where Russian soldiers saw impenetrable vegetation, I recognized subtle game trails and natural pathways. Where they perceived uniform green canopy, I identified specific trees and rock formations that served as navigation markers. After 90 minutes of movement, I reached the first rally point, a small clearing marked by a distinctive split boulder. 3 other fighters had already arrived, including Islam, who had destroyed the lead BTR with his RPG. We exchanged hand signals confirming no pursuit, then continued along separate routes to our secondary rally point another 2 kilometers distant. By mid-afternoon, all 7 ambush team members had successfully regrouped at our camp, hidden in a remote valley inaccessible to vehicles. Preliminary assessment indicated we had destroyed 3 Russian vehicles and inflicted approximately 20 casualties without taking any losses ourselves. In the arithmetic of asymmetric warfare, this represented a significant victory. "The commander will be pleased," noted Ruslan as we performed weapons maintenance that evening. 7 ambushes this month, all successful. I nodded but said nothing, focused on cleaning carbon residue from my rifle's bolt group. The technical aspects of warfare, weapon maintenance, tactical positioning, terrain analysis, occupied my thoughts more than any ideological or emotional considerations. I fought because fighting was what men in my family had always done when outsiders threatened our homeland. The motivation required no elaborate justification beyond this simple historical continuity. The Russians would respond to our ambush with their typical pattern: artillery strikes against suspected fighter positions, usually empty, helicopter gunship patrols that consumed enormous resources while achieving little, and punitive operations against nearby villages suspected of supporting insurgents. This last element would simply drive more young men into our ranks, perpetuating the cycle of violence that had defined Chechnya for generations. 3 days later, we received reports that a Russian armored column had entered a village 5 kilometers from our ambush site, detaining dozens of men for questioning and burning several houses suspected of harboring fighters. The predictability of their response confirmed Commander Galaev's assessment. The Russians remained incapable of adapting to the realities of mountain warfare, despite their technological and numerical advantages. They understand only brute force, observed Islam as we prepared for our next operation. It's why they cannot win here, no matter how many tanks and aircraft they bring. They can destroy everything, countered Magomed, our oldest fighter at 45. Turn every village to rubble, every forest to ash. And still we would fight from the ruins and ashes, Islam replied with the absolute conviction of youth. This is the lesson they refuse to learn from Afghanistan, from the first war here. You cannot bomb a people into submission when they prefer death to surrender. I listened to this exchange without comment, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. The philosophical dimensions of our struggle interested me less than its practical execution. My responsibility was planning and executing operations that maximized enemy casualties while preserving our limited resources. The larger meaning of the conflict, religious, political, historical, I left to others more inclined towards such considerations. The following week, we conducted another ambush against a Russian patrol, this time along a different forest road 10 kilometers from our previous engagement. The operation followed the same template that had proven successful repeatedly. Careful selection of terrain, precise positioning of fighters, coordination of IEDs with direct fire, and immediate dispersion after the engagement. Russian casualties. This time included a senior officer, a major from the Ministry of Internal Affairs who had developed a reputation for brutal interrogation techniques. His death would be reported as heroic sacrifice in anti-terrorist operations. The reality of his execution-style killing, after being wounded too politically uncomfortable for Moscow to acknowledge. After 6 months of continuous operations, our group had conducted 23 ambushes, resulting in an estimated 137 Russian casualties and 19 destroyed vehicles. Our own losses numbered just 4 fighters, a ratio that would be unsustainable for any conventional military force, but was precisely the dynamic that defined successful insurgencies throughout history. Yet I harbored no illusions about the strategic situation. While we could bleed the Russians indefinitely in the forests and mountains, they controlled the cities and major transportation routes. Their resources, while not infinite, vastly exceeded ours. Each fighter we lost represented irreplaceable local knowledge and combat experience, while Russian casualties were simply replaced by fresh conscripts from their seemingly endless human reserves. We are ghosts haunting their occupation, Commander Galaev told us during a rare visit to our camp. Not strong enough to drive them out completely, but ensuring they never sleep soundly in our homeland. This aptly described our situation. Neither winning nor losing, but maintaining a level of resistance that prevented the Russians from consolidating their control. Whether this represented strategic success or merely prolonged inevitable defeat depended entirely on one's time horizon and definition of victory. For my part, I measured success in immediate tactical terms. Ambushes executed according to plan, casualties inflicted without taking losses, weapons and ammunition captured to sustain future operations. The grand political questions about Chechnya's ultimate status held little relevance to daily survival in an environment where detection meant death. In the forest, reality was reduced to its simplest components. The Russians traveled the roads because their heavy vehicles and equipment gave them no alternative. We ambushed them because their predictable movement patterns made them vulnerable. They responded with overwhelming but unfocused violence because their doctrine permitted no other approach. The cycle continued not because either side failed to recognize it, but because neither could envision an alternative within their operational constraints. So we fought on through the seasons, our tactics evolving in response to Russian adaptations, but our fundamental approach remaining consistent. The forest witnessed it all with impassive permanence, the blood soaking into soil that had absorbed similar offerings for centuries, the shattered equipment gradually reclaimed by vegetation. The bodies returned to the earth regardless of the uniform they wore. "Do you ever wonder what peace would look like?" asked a young fighter who had joined us after his brother's death in a Russian artillery strike. "Peace is just war by other means," replied Magomed, with the fatalism of a man who had seen conflict across multiple generations. "The Russians leave, then return. They promise autonomy, then revoke it. The only constant is that we fight when they are here, and prepare to fight when they are gone." I remained silent during such discussions, focusing instead on planning our next ambush. The philosophical questions had no practical bearing on tomorrow's operation or next week's raid. The Russians would continue traveling the forest roads, because their military infrastructure required it. We would continue ambushing them because it was the most effective application of our limited resources. This was the reality of our struggle. Not glorious jihad or patriotic resistance as portrayed in propaganda, but the cold mathematics of asymmetric warfare applied in terrain that favored the smaller, more mobile force. The forest understood this calculus better than any human strategist, having witnessed countless conflicts decided not by ideology or technology, but by adaptation to the eternal constants of its domain. And so I cleaned my rifle, studied maps, planned routes, and prepared for the next ambush, with the methodical focus of a craftsman rather than the fervor of a believer. The Russians would come along the forest road as they always did. We would kill them as we always had. Some of us would eventually die as others already had. The trees would watch impassively, adding another layer of human conflict to their rings, of silent witnessing. This was not good or evil, right or wrong, merely the continuation of a historical pattern older than any nation-state or political ideology. The forest would remain long after both Russians and Chechens had exhausted themselves in this cycle of violence. Perhaps that perspective, the temporal insignificance of our struggle against the backdrop of the mountain's ancient patience, was the only truly objective view of this conflict.